Good evening, everybody, and you're all very welcome to D4H. We've changed things up a little bit due to technology reasons. We had to relocate the speakers for tonight's OBI CPC night session. So, as per the programme was given to you, still the same. The speakers are still the same. The only difference is we're now broadcasting to 17 centres nationwide in Ireland. We've got some viewers coming in from Abu Dhabi, from Israel, from USA, Canada, North and South America as well, which have been all linked in through the technology that's been provided to us here in D4H Technologies. It would be wrong of us to continue tonight without taking a minute to reflect on what happened the weekend, to pay our respects to the pre-hospital care providers around the world, especially in Paris and France, who done some excellent work at the weekend in Paris. We hear a lot about the people who died, but we very rarely hear about the amount of people who were saved on the weekend. So I think at this stage, throughout all the centres, I'd like to take a minute just through pictures and reflect on some of the work that was done by both volunteers and state services in Paris over on Friday night. Robin, you're up. Have a seat. So the pictures really capture, to me, what FOAMed is all about. We had members of Red Cross, we had members of the French Fire Service working alongside SAMU in Paris with the police, all with one aim at the end of the day, and that's pre-hospital care, the patient goal. And that's kind of the reason behind why we do these FOAMed nights. So all the speakers who come and give their time for free, all the precipitators or the facilitators in the centres around the country give their time for free is all for one thing, and that's for patient benefit at the end of the day, and the sharing of information through an excellent source being Twitter, through YouTube, through SMAC, through FOAMed, and at the end of the day the patient's going to benefit. Tonight really couldn't have really come off the ground without the help of Robin Blanford from D4H Technologies, and I've invited Robin along to just give us some insight or some idea of who D4H are. I will start by saying that the video you've seen at the start is a drone picture of Robin's office in the Bailey Lighthouse in Hoth. It looks nothing like that right now. And everybody who came into the room tonight kind of couldn't believe we actually got here because they thought we were going off a cliff's edge. So, I mean, on a good day, Robin, I'd say this place looks absolutely fantastic.
So we're 143 foot above the Irish Sea here in Dublin Bay in a lighthouse, the Bailey Lighthouse.
Okay.
So this is the offices of D4H Technologies. We specialise in emergency response software.
Excellent, excellent. So I obviously know you, Robin, as a friend of mine. We've worked together over the years as an EMT and some of the festivals and the gigs. But D4H Technologies, just tell us a bit about what you actually do.
Yep. So we help emergency response organisations manage information. That information might either be their analytics and reporting, so trying to pass incident reports up from there might be hundreds of teams across a region, province or state of the US, and they pass those incident reports up through regions, up to organisations. So we give them that ability to report their incidents in. We also help them with personnel and training, so that's making sure that everyone's qualified, that the team who go out are compliant, that they've got enough experience, that they've got enough training done. So it's a whole set of tools around personnel and training management. We've got an equipment management suite, so that helps you make sure your equipment's ready. So again, in a big organisation, that's summarising up thousands and thousands of pieces of equipment and consumables and vehicles into a single green traffic light for an organisation. So they're able to say at the top, every truck is inspected, every inventory is done. We've enough foam in that on that site. We've enough, oxygen here, and that's what the software does. And it starts to give them a sort of amber and then red lights where they need to focus their attention.
So really, I mean, from where we're coming from continuous professional development and continuous professional competency, which is required for all pre-hospital care providers as well, from EMT upwards as such, you are really relevant to this talk tonight because you do assist with training and also making sure your members are properly trained up and have the appropriate certification and competency, which is excellent.
Yeah.
Give us some ideas, some of the clients you're working with, or some of the people, the organisations.
Yeah, so I mean, well, we're this small little company in Ireland. We recorded, I think, 15 million hours of response last year.
Wow.
for organisations in 16 countries. It's thousands and thousands and thousands of first responders. A lot of them in Canada, a lot of them in the US. New Zealand's very strong. Australia, Iceland, UK. We're all over the place. And actually, there's a lot of them watching tonight.
Yeah, I was blown away by that when you gave me the email telling me like 11,500 people got an email today over the last 24 hours telling them about this live stream. And what type of feedback were you getting back from the countries around the world?
Yeah, everyone's very excited by the idea of the free open medical education. I think people really like the idea of it, and they're excited to see the speakers this evening.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, from a small little country in the Atlantic, you know, we're streaming to all over the world and showing them exactly what we can do. Excellent. Plans for the future, Robin? What are you looking at? What would you like to see coming on board?
So we've just got a new product, which has gone out to its first sites now, first customers, and that is for managing information during an incident. So what we're trying to do is create an information management tool, so capturing information to create a single source of truth in an incident. So when something's moving very fast, a lot of people are using maybe different whiteboards or in different rooms or different vehicles or however they might be trying to organize an incident. And what we do is create this source of truth. And so for every piece of information that comes in, we know what the source was and how old it is. So you get timely kind of gauge on the information.
Okay, so if I was to say our sound was very, very bad here at the moment, would you be able to give us any advice on how we can get the sound up? If we can, this is the message coming through from some of the centres. But that aside, from an Irish perspective, some of the people you want to deal with in Ireland, do you want to give a message to them? Because we owe you a lot for opening up your office and stuff.
We do this for organisations around the world. Delighted to work with people in Ireland as well. We do have quite a few Irish customers, and delighted to work with them. We enjoy kind of going internationally and showing best practice being done here in Ireland.
Okay, so your plug. How do we access? How do we contact you?
D4H.org is our website, or just Google D4H, and you'll find us. And just get in touch or drop me an email, Robin Blanford.
Fantastic.
Search anywhere, yeah.
Listen, mate, thanks very much for joining us. Thanks for coming on tonight.
Enjoy the evening.
Thank you. So listen, guys, just to let you know, any questions you have over the course of the evening, if you can tweet it using the hashtag OBICPC, that will come to us here in the Lighthouse, and we'll be able to answer those questions live for the speakers that's coming up tonight. Give you some idea who's coming on board. We've got Bridget Synott, who's going to join us from the Irish Heart Foundation. She's going to discuss the new AHA 2015 guidelines. Followed then by Dr. Denis Driscol, who's a pharmacist with the HSE, and he's going to give us a discussion around the street drugs that he's coming across in his kind of professional life, as well as the ones we know and the ones we don't know that we're not fully aware of, how to recognise and what we're going to do. And then we're going to finish off the night with Dr. Sinead Bhraonain, who is a consultant in emergency medicine, and she's going to give us a bit of information about unintentional overdoses. What we'll do is we're going to run straight through from now. It's up to your facilitator and your centre whether you want to take a tea break. Strongly advise you do it after the second speaker and say maybe 10 or 15 minutes. But all you've got to do is press pause, go off and get your cup of tea, and then come back and press play, and we should be here to go from there. So in about 2 minutes, we're going to kick off now with our next speaker. So thanks for joining us.
Van je vier grim naar hier, Calorief nach me in hart. Down a sam cobble there scale, ach tam mer manakart. Dear she long on a go sultans, dagen kiel revish. She master any lurking out the war she towering queen. So lig my seer on soon fire. Spawn and bow where is karam. Ban and make can't scream amach shmine. Give it all in on. So lig my seer on soon fire. Spawn and bow where is karam. Ban and make can't scream amach shmine. Give it all in on.
folks, you're all very, very welcome back. I'm not alone here, by the way. There's about maybe 13 or 14 people sitting behind the camera who are all being very, very quiet and who've come along to join us tonight for the OBI CPC night. So please, guys, give us a bit of feedback. So I'm joined now by Bridget Synott, along the AHA 2015 guidelines. Bridget, you're very, very welcome. Free, so I appreciate it. Obviously, in the last couple of months, or the last month or so, do you want to give us?
Right, so here comes the government health warning. Please note, do not implement the guidelines until advised by is an overview of the guidelines. I'll try. What's new? I think most people at this stage are after reading the guidelines, and really and truly there are very few changes in it, but yet I've managed to have 17 slides, but I will go through them fairly fast. I suppose this time round what there was a change in the process as to how the guidelines are reviewed, and in some cases there isn't a huge amount of evidence, so they're sticking with what we have already. There is an instance of care here in Ireland. We're actually ahead of the posse in some conferences in recent weeks, and to be honest with you, it's lovely to see the statistics and see a little bit more on the systems of care as I go through it, but it's just something for us to think about as we go along. This is one of the first changes, I suppose. Really, we're all very familiar with the chain of survival, so this time round they've decided that really and truly we've always had the one chain of survival that worked for in-hospital and out of hospital, whereas as now we have an in-hospital chain of survival and we have an out-of-hospital chain of survival. The in-hospital chain of survival, I suppose really if you think about it, in-hospital at the minute, and I suppose I'm really talking to more pre-hospital setting here, but just so that you're aware of it, they have the COMPASS programme, which is prevention, calling for help early in play within the hospital setting, again starting CPR early, early defibrillation, and then the aftercare in the ICUs. For the out of hospital setting, the emphasis is definitely changing, and if you think about our community first responder schemes here in Ireland, which are growing every week, to be honest, which is fantastic, because we are aware here in Ireland that it's the community first responder scheme is the way to go. The public access defibrillation, where we have an AED on a wall, number of people trained but not linked with the ambulance service, will never have the same survival as our community first responder schemes. So if you look on it here, the blue line, they're saying the lay rescuer will look after that, which is your early phone call, and in this now they're suggesting that everybody puts their mobile phone onto loudspeaker when they're doing it. Bhraonain, who a number of you know in the Midlands, did a study back in recent times, and he did look at third-party calls and the number of people that use landlines in Ireland, and really and truly it was 49-51%, where we all think that everybody uses their mobile phones. They actually don't. So encourage people to use their mobile phones and put them on loudspeaker, because dispatch is the first part now in our systems of care, and there's a huge emphasis on dispatch, the call taker, and training of the call taker, recognising cardiac arrest. And they are addressing that here in Ireland. So again, you know, we're up there with the best. CPR, early CPR, hands-only CPR for those who are untrained, continue the courses then for those who are, for the rest of the community. 67% doing bystander CPR here in Ireland, probably around 4th in the world. So again, everybody needs to take a pat on the back there. Early defibrillation, we do need to work a little bit more on that one with our community first responder schemes, and just getting more and more. I keep highlighting this. If you look, the ambulance is actually the 4th link in the chain of survival. So oftentimes we are saying that response times are poor in Ireland, etc., etc. But if it's the 4th link in the chain of survival, if the first 3 links aren't there, well then we're not going to have increase in survival. And then our 5th link is cath labs and ICUs, and I have a few slides on that later on. You'll see where it'll fit in. Okay, I could talk on the chain of survival all night. I better move on. So some of the changes in the adult BLS. So they've simplified the universal algorithm. In doing that, if you remember, as healthcare professionals, there was checking for a response, there was assessing breathing, there was calling for help, then there was checking a pulse, all separate steps. From here on in, that will all be done simultaneously. And I think most people, in fairness, in healthcare professionals, will always work in that sense. For heart savers, it is staying the same. So it will be that sequence step. They're recommending that we encourage community first responder schemes, which we are doing already. Emphasis on the dispatcher's role, I've spoken about that already. Continued emphasis on high quality CPR. And I think this is something that we all have to work on. We all think we're great at doing CPR, but to be honest, until we get down on those mannequins with feedback devices and measure ourselves, that's when we'll know how good we are at the CPR. And that needs to be done regularly, and that's really coming through in the guidelines, because it's good quality CPR and early defibrillation is what saves lives. They're telling us to aim for a compression fraction of at least 60%, but the best outcomes are at 80%. We did a study recently in Ireland. There was Niamh Cummins, Owen Connolly and myself, little plug in, and we did a study and we found that 65% was the compression fraction. It was done at the Respond conference, and thanks to everybody who took part in it. And the compression fraction was actually 65%. So we actually have a good bit of work still to do, but at least we're over 60%. So that's good. The rate now, if you remember with AHA, they were very much saying at least 100 per minute. It's now 100 to 120 per minute. So they've now tightened it up, and anybody that's going over 120 should be told to slow down. The depth, 5 centimetres, but no more than 6 centimetres. But, if you see the but, you are not to emphasise to people that they can go too deep, because to be honest, most people actually don't go deep enough with their compressions. So, so anybody that's out there and encouraging people to do CPR, don't emphasise that you can go too deep, really and truly. Alright. Okay, this is going to be very difficult for anybody to see it. You can get all of this on the highlights of the AHA, and it's in the book. I just put it up just so people could see it. And the other thing that I put up is the algorithm, because any of the AHA people would have known it was a circular algorithm before, but ERC and AHA have now gone with this type of algorithm.
So remember you said the cycle, was it the ring that was going around?
Yes.
The continuous following?
Yeah.
So that's done away, we're going to...
That's done away. So whereas as if you can see now, there's the victim is unresponsive, shout for help, activate emergency response, get an AED. So it's all done together. It's done simultaneously.
Was there any reason behind the changing of the symbols? Was there any signs that kind of or they just decided to change it?
I think they just decided to change it.
Okay.
Can't answer that one.
Keith Kennedy in Donegal wants to know, can we provide subtitles for the Wexford accent? So sorry, Keith.
I'll talk slower.
Yeah.
Thanks, Keith. Other things. Chest compression, feedback devices. So they're telling us that it's reasonable to use. Now, I would have said that it probably would have improved survival, but the studies are actually saying at this stage it's not improving survival, but it is reasonable to use them. And I suppose definitely in practice sessions they are saying that feedback devices definitely are the way to go. The other thing that has simplified at last is ventilation with an advanced airway is now gone to 1 breath every 6 seconds. I think most of this people have been doing anyway. Mechanical chest compression devices, reasonable in specific, challenging or dangerous settings. I hope they have one here. ECMO and invasive perfusion devices can be considered. I suppose that's in the setting where it's available. It can certainly be considered, but they're not advising every hospital to go out and get ECMO.
This is interesting, Bridget, before you go on, because we've got for the first time for CPC nights, we've got a group in Killarney, first responder group who's joined us down there who wanted to get involved, and it's great. And some of the other centres, there's a few CFOs as well being involved. These groups aren't being suggested to go out and buy these mechanical devices to make their service any better.
They're not, because when you look at the research, the outcomes were no different from well-trained people using good quality CPR and those using mechanical chest compression devices. But what they're saying is, in an area where the back maybe even move an ambulance or coming down the stairs or maybe hypothermic arrest, they're the places where mechanical chest compression devices would come into their own.
Brilliant, that's great.
Okay. Just going on to the ACLS, and again, it's as I said I'd go through all of the changes. Vasopressin has been removed. Pre-hospital, we hadn't been using vasopressin anyway. I don't think, had we?
No.
No.
Very, very few.
Yeah. They're telling us, they're giving us a guidance here on if an entitled CO2 prediction of failed is a predictor of failed resuscitation. So if you have your entitled CO2 device in place and that you haven't achieved 10 millimeters of mercury over a 20-minute period, it means that, but you must ensure high quality CPR, it means that it probably is going to be an unsuccessful resuscitation. So, I mean, that's probably something to consider along the way. The lignocaine again is kind of being pushed further down, and again there's not the same evidence to suggest that we use lignocaine. Right. They're telling us.
Sorry, you have to excuse me while I'm operating the Twitter machine here as well, so bear with me. So go ahead.
All right. Again, angio should be performed early rather than later on out of hospital cardiac arrest patients. Again, we do have that here in place. I mean, the idea is to get people to angio as early as possible. Targeted temperature management. So before we were talking about therapeutic hypothermia, they've now changed this to targeted temperature management. And the idea is really and truly is that you keep a temperature at a constant level. Instead of maybe cooling people right down to 32 degrees, it's reasonable to keep someone at 36 degrees, but you must keep them at that for at least 24 hours. And it's all about maintaining that temperature rather than peaks and troughs. They're telling us fever equals poor outcomes. So another thing that'll come up in a minute as well, in pre-hospital, they've removed the cooling with the rapid ice fluids. I'm not so sure of that. I mean, it was ice packs and that were being done here. They're now saying that there really isn't any advantage to cooling people in the pre-hospital. It's kind of wait, bring them in, and then it's keep a constant temperature. Okay, so I've just said that. Following a cardiac arrest, they're now telling us as well that it's reasonable to avoid immediately correcting hypertension, because in the last lot of guidelines it was if the systolic was 90 or below, it was kind of give 2 litres of fluids straight away. Now they're kind of saying it's reasonable to wait for a few minutes and then consider giving your fluids. Anything coming in there, Glenn?
I'm just kind of looking at, there was one came in alright about the ventilations. I'm just going to get up just, you work away.
Okay. Special circumstances. This is something else that's after arriving in Ireland. So emphasis on the administration of naloxone for any suspected opioid OD for non-healthcare professionals to deliver, and it can be delivered either IM or IN, and I know that that was passed even recently here in Ireland. Cardiac arrest in pregnancy. So the wedge is no longer advised. So instead it's manual displacement and early C-section. Okay, so we're moving on now to pediatric BLS. So they're recommending that we continue with the CAB sequence. They have looked at that because I know ERC go with ABC, but they're saying that it's reasonable to still go with CAB. If you look down at the end here, they're strongly reaffirming that compressions and ventilations are necessary for pediatrics. Again, the use of the mobile phone. So if you remember, it was always that you did 2 minutes of CPR, then you go and you make your phone call. They're really stressing, have your mobile phone, put it on loudspeaker, make the call as early as you can, be in constant contact with the call taker. Again, the depth, upper limit of 6 centimetres and the rate 100 to 120. So that really hasn't changed too much. Again, there's your algorithm. Just giving you a quick look at it. Just a few bits on education. I'm almost finished. So good to use feedback devices, especially those with corrective feedback. So you know the way we've been talking about metronomes, not a huge advantage in using the metronomes because it's not telling you whether you're going too fast or too slow, and some people have no rhythm. But it is better if the device is speaking back to you and that you can look at it on a table then afterwards. High fidelity mannequins and realistic scenarios. That's what they're suggesting. Now that's not saying that everybody should go out and spend a fortune on mannequins either, but I suppose for training and maybe in paramedic schools and nursing schools and that, it is best to have high fidelity mannequins and set proper scenarios. Here's something interesting, is that there is confirmation now that CPR learned through self-instructing is as good as instructor-led. So we're not as brilliant as we think we are. And AED usage is not exclusive to those trained. So the recommendation is that anybody can really use an AED. We'll skip the next point. An emphasis on team dynamics, and this should be during all training. I have it up there as ACLS courses, but it's during all training that the team dynamics should be in place. Still, we can encourage compression only CPR for the untrained. They're telling us that 2-year training is, at the minute, it's remaining as 2 years training, but that's not optimal. We should be doing training probably every 3 months, to be honest, to keep up our skills.
Let's do a bit of a survey here of the practitioners who's involved in tonight's show. How often are you guys practicing your CPR AED skills? And realistically now.
Okay, not often then.
Yeah.
Every 8 weeks.
Every 8 weeks maybe. Okay.
Well, that's
okay,
good.
Brilliant. So
Yeah,
that's
that's
really, really
brilliant.
good.
Yeah.
So I think what Bridget is saying is don't be throwing the high fidelity simulator mannequins down the side of the cliff to try and bring them back up again because they're a pretty expensive piece of kit. Go ahead.
That's it.
Okay, so thanks very much, Bridget. Got some stuff coming in
It's
for
a
you.
bit fast.
Peter Conroy, who's a firefighter, I don't really know Peter, he's based in Fisborough Fire Station, but he's also involved in the surf rescue environment. He's going to give a talk next year about international surf rescue and CPR and how it's progressing as such as a speciality in itself. Peter's come in and said, what are the guidelines for drowning victims? Have they changed at all?
The recommendation is the breaths and the compressions again, and just the emphasis on the breaths for those that are drowning, but nothing new in that.
So he then goes on and says, with the emphasis on CPR first being pushed at the moment, isn't it more effective for breaths first with drowning, hanging or electrocution?
Okay, and I suppose one of the things with the CAB is to keep it simple for everybody.
Okay.
And if you think about it, your 30 compressions will be delivered in approximately 15 seconds, and then you're into your 2 breaths anyway.
Okay. So it's circulating that oxygen that's already in the system before the incident taking
I
place.
suppose if we start giving people, for this you're going to have to do this, and for that you're going
Yes.
to have to do that, so that's why it's keep it simple, CAB, it's compressions first, then airway, and as I said, it's only going to be a few seconds, because the emphasis is on getting in there early with the compressions.
So I suppose it leads on from an Irish Heart Foundation perspective. How are you planning your rollout now with 2015 guidelines? What's in the pipeline for yourselves?
Yeah, so what will happen for instructors is that we will soon be issuing you with the link to the online update, and hopefully then in January we will have the interim materials. People can start doing their updates and start using the interim materials. As you can see, there are very few changes. It'll be just a few little tweaks. The materials are going to change, but I actually I don't know what way they are going to change, but the materials will be changing. And I suspect that it will be more time spent on mannequins, to be honest.
So Grania Ryan, who is facilitating down in Waterford, not Waterford, sorry, Clonmel, pardon, Clonmel. By the way, Grania's my sidekick, so none of this happens without her. She does everything and I have to carry on. She's come in and says the mechanical CPR device being tested in rural versus urban settings. Is less practitioners so surely better outcome?
I suspect, but what they did when they were doing the link trial and the CERC trial was that paramedics that were going up against the machines, and they had to have top quality CPR. They did regular practice with their CPR, and they felt that that was the fairest way, that it wasn't fair putting up a mechanical device against man.
Yeah.
If man
Or
wasn't
woman.
ready, or woman,
Yeah.
if they weren't prepared, and that's the way the study was done.
Okay.
So I suppose when you think about it, if we're looking at studies and we look at our own CPR, and when we measure ourselves against devices, our CPR isn't always top quality. So if we're going to be saying, mechanical versus man or woman,
Yeah.
we better make sure that our CPR is good quality.
It's good. It's up to
Yeah.
standard as well.
Yeah.
From my perspective, listening within the FOMED community, and I know a lot of people who are with us tonight, including Jason Coyne, who's a former paramedic here in Ireland, out in Abu Dhabi at the minute, and he's watching in live from Abu Dhabi. So how are you, Jason? We're hearing a lot of the like of ECMO, PEA arrests, patients under a certain age, criteria tests, trials that were done in countries relating to age-specific PEA. Are we far off it here in Ireland? Are we far actually to getting specialised cardiac centres that will give us ECMO on a certain set of criteria, do you think?
I don't know, Glenn, to be
Okay,
honest with
okay.
you. I don't know. I mean, I suppose things are improving, there's no doubt about it. Like if we look even at out of hospital cardiac arrests and the improvement that we've had in the last number of years, and percentages improve, I think we're getting much more focused in this country. People are working together, the awareness is there. So I suppose it is the next step. I suppose I'm not as familiar with the hospital scene now as I used to be.
Okay,
Maybe
yeah,
Sinead can answer some of
Yeah,
those
yeah.
questions later on. But
Prepare for that one. Yeah,
we
go
have
ahead.
we have an answer.
No, I have a question.
Go ahead, John.
It's just, I was reading a newsletter recently by the London Ambulance Service, and we're talking about this test that they're having now with their CPR and their force response, and it's gone up in good percentages. But one of the reasons seems to be that once they have a ROSC, you know, that they're allowed to bring people to the PCI centre, which seems to me like a sensible move.
And that's,
is there any?
Yeah, that's the recommendation
Any
that they're
movement
coming
on
with
that?
now. Early PCI, you know, don't be hanging around. If somebody has a cardiac arrest, they're recommending they're recommending there several. I forget exactly the recommendation, but really they're recommending that everybody goes to PCI.
Yeah, no, after
After a
is
ROSC.
successful.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
No,
Yeah.
it's just that they're doing it, and I know we're not doing it. So I was wondering, you know, whether we were going to get into it.
Is it a recommendation coming down here, would you think, from AHA or IHF? Or?
Well, I suspect that if it comes in on the guidelines, that it will be the hospitals and the clinical leads that will adapt it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. From an Irish Heart Foundation perspective, obviously there's the CPR aspect, but there's many other arms to the Irish Heart Foundation with healthy eating. You know, as I said, we have a number of community first responders from small towns. People have AEDs. Obviously, it's been highlighted, but checking of the AEDs, the batteries,
Yeah.
in certain towns, certain communities, there are people who are interested who will continue to check the machines to make sure they work. But there's more to the Irish Heart Foundation than just CPR and defibrillation. Can you give us some indication how, say, a town could go by becoming a healthy town or health-wise or anything like that?
Yeah, well, they have the Slinas launcher routes,
Okay.
and I suppose the Heart Foundation.
Which you did tonight, I think, coming down that hill.
Surely did. I'll do it again going back up it. You know, there's some of the healthy eating programs. The Heart Foundation are going through a whole new strategic plan at the minute. So there will be lots of exciting things being launched in 2016. Without me saying too much here at the minute, but I think that we're hoping that the Heart Foundation will become much more visible in 2016. The Heart Foundation will be 50 years old, and you know, so it's 50 years fighting heart disease and stroke, and there are lots of new things on the horizon. So hopefully that there will be far more community engagement between the Heart Foundation and communities.
And it goes back to one of our watchers, or one of our people tuning in there from Killarney, the CFR group in Killarney. They're doing their Operation Resuscitation,
Yes, that
which is going to be rolling out around the country very, very soon. And I think Operation Transformation is coming back soon, shortly again. So maybe we might get some link up between the two of them from a health education perspective. I think it's wise that the two of them get involved. But best of luck to the guys out in Killarney down there who's going to be rolling us out in Kilkenny, I think shortly, Carlow and some other towns as well. So if you can, try and get involved as well.
Mm.
So Bridget, Twitter is quiet at the moment. Really enjoying FOMED tonight. Well done for making CPC easier to maintain. That came from Wexford Civil Defence. They're having no problems understanding what you're saying at all.
See, on the Huns.
So it's good. So listen, I know you're going to get back to Wexford tonight, but thank you very, very much for joining
No
us.
bother. Thanks a
Again,
million. Thanks for
these
having
things
me.
can't happen without you. So and hopefully we'll see you again next year.
Thanks
All
very
right,
much.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thanks everyone.
So folks, just going to take a 2-minute break there if we can. We're just going to run a video and then we're going to get our next speaker lined up. So come back soon. Thank you.
Van je vier grim naar hier. Calorie nach me in hart. Down a sam kabel der scale. Ach ta mer malakart. Dear she long gonna go satans. Dagen kiel revish. She master any lerkin out the war she towering queen. So leg my seer on soon fire. Spawn and bow where is karam. Ban and make can't scream amach shmine. Give it all in on. So leg my seer on soon fire. Spawn and bow where is karam. Ban and make can't scream amach shmine. Give it all in on. Van je vier grim na hier Color reef nach me in hart Down a sam cobble there scale Ach tá mér malachart Dear she long gonna go so tans Dagan kiel revish She master any lerkin out the war she tower in queen So lig my seer on soon tire Spawn and bow her is karam Ban and make can't scream amach she mine Give it to the So lig my seer on soon tire Spawn and bow her is karam Ban and make can't scream amach she mine Give it to the
Okay, folks, you're all very, very welcome back to OBI CPC Nights. I'm joined now by Dr. Denis Driscol, who's the chief pharmacist with the HSC's Addiction Services Programme. So, Denis, you're very, very welcome
Thank
tonight.
you very much, Glenn. Thank you.
Just before Denis starts, you'll notice between the speakers we're playing the EMS gathering video from 2014. I just couldn't find the 2015 video, so Kieran Henry, you need to get on top of that fairly soon. EMS gathering is coming again this year, and it's an excellent weekend of learning through leisure run in Killarney. Huge support behind it last year, and I think we're going to double that this year if we can. What's more important about it this year, it's just before the SMAC conference, so we're going to get a lot of specialists, I believe, coming over beforehand for a bit of a holiday, who's going to join us down in Killarney for gathering this year. Sinead, have you dates for gathering? Because I can't remember at the moment. What date is SMAC?
14th, 16th.
So it's the week before, I think. So it's the which?
9th for the gathering.
So 9th of July for the gathering this year again in Killarney. So registration hasn't started yet, but if you keep an eye out for it, because it's a really, really good conference. I've been there for the last 2 years, and I recommend it to any pre-hospital care provider in the country. So we'll just get back to Denis now and welcome Denis. So Denis, you're very welcome to the Bailey Lighthouse. What's interesting about Denis is that Denis's father worked here years and years ago as a lighthouse keeper, and he got lost tonight. So you know, that's how good it was. The light was shining bright and he still couldn't find it. Dennis, you're very, very welcome. Can you give us just, before you start, a bit of a brief background of yourself and where you're coming from?
I work in the Addiction Services, which is for CHO Area 7, the new healthcare organisations, but I cover the entire country for Pharmacy Needle Exchange Programme. I'm also the lead on the naloxone study that's been rolled out by the HSE about its viability for lay administration, and I also deal with pharmacists who dispense methadone. And within the area I cover, I have 10 addiction treatment services that have about 1,700 patients in it.
Excellent.
And I've been in it since 1998.
So you've seen the evolution of the whole thing?
Evolution and
revolution.
And revolution, and the loss of a lot of resource towards addiction, and the continuous changes, which has been, interesting.
Interestingly enough, one of the reasons why I asked you to come on tonight was we get a lot of pre-hospital practitioners who don't come across drug overdoses very, very often. Sometimes they might relate the signs and symptoms to it, a more medical thing. Another reason I asked you, obviously, with the debate that's going on about the safe and clean room injection booths going on in the country, nobody wants them on their doorstep. I would be an advocate for them. I think they're a definite way forward. We need to address a growing problem in society. And as a pre-hospital worker in Dublin, I get to see the needles and the dirt around the place. So, any idea how far are we far away, or what do you think?
That the piece around that is that it's very easy, the health side of that. The difficult side is the criminal and the justice side of how that will be operated. And I think we have to be very careful what is being done. It's not what you're planning on decriminalising will be the drug user's use rather than the drug itself. So we have to be careful about how we describe that. And if you look at a lot of the models around Europe, particularly in Portugal, which seems to be the one they're leaning towards most, is that they decriminalised the use of drugs by drug users rather than decriminalising drugs. And everyone automatically thinks, oh, they're decriminalising drugs, you can use drugs anywhere. That's not the intention. I think the most difficult part around supervised injecting rooms would be where they be placed, how many, and how they can be operated. Should in conjunction, you could argue, should heroin-assisted therapy go in with that rather than methadone, buprenorphine as treatment options for heroin users? That's another aspect that should be looked at the same time. If we look at any of the models around Europe, they've operated reasonably well. They have reduced, definitely, as you already described, drug-related litter, which is a problem, particularly when you're providing needle exchange programs. There's a definitive problem with drug-related litter. The idea that a safe injector room, you also may prevent some of the overdoses with regards to people having overdose, that in actual fact, if they do go over in the injector room, we'll have all the facility there to look after them. I myself would advocate for medically supervised injecting rooms. The only thing I would like is that we are very clear on what they are under legislation, that we're very clear, are they a clinic, a hospital, a surgery, what are they, so that they can be ascribed and be properly and qualitatively looked after from a quality perspective, that we have proper policies, procedures, good terms of reference around them, good information around how they should operate, and that you have to fit within that, otherwise they can't operate, because you'll need to get buy-in from the public as well, that this is a good thing. And I know a lot of people say, oh, the public really want it. It'll be interesting when you say, I'm opening it up at the top of the Bailey Lighthouse, how people will react to that.
I suppose that brings us into our topic tonight, so the street drugs we know and don't.
Yeah, thanks for the topic, Glenn. I've tried to cover everything, and some of the topics like Glenn specifically asked was around ketamine and MDMA. We are seeing a little bit of an increase in the use of them. Ketamine, much more difficult to figure out because of its short acting, and our biggest problem with all our drug use is polydrug use. So it's not necessarily a singular drug, even though alcohol is quite implicated in a lot of singular drugs. And so what I start my presentation off with is overdose, and the National Drug Related Death Index. And then I move into each drug class and try to classify each drug like as a depressant, CNS depressant, stimulant, and I use the lovely word others, because I classify cannabis quite as others, because it's such an interesting drug, and from the perspective that the benefit you get from it depends on where you use it, how you use it in your own mood, which I always find interesting. And the other thing is, a lot of people kind of go, oh, it's just cannabis, what's the big deal? But the big deal is modern day cannabis from years ago cannabis is about 40 times more potent. So nowadays, so okay. It's quite a, wow. They've been really good at plant culture with regards to this product. The growth factories for these have produced extremely good quality product. So it would be great if they actually turn that towards pharmaceuticals, but it's they've produced a very good product from this. So if I just quickly say, so I hope to cover opioids, benzos, alcohol, ketamine, MPS is novel psychoactive substances. These are these substances you continuously hear about coming in and out of the whole plethora of a new substance has just been found in the street. What is it? It's a needle in a haystack, unless you kind of tell me what the symptomology of the person was, and then you kind of aim, all right, they were a bit like that, so we'll look for if it's in that spectrum, because often when you get a sample powder of anything, you're kind of looking at something and it could be anything in it. CNS stimulants, cocaine, amphetamines, NPS, and I've also included in the stimulants some of the nootropics, which are very interesting drugs. These are pharmacy products, so pharmaceutically manufactured products that are being used, misused, used interestingly, okay, other than what they're originally indicated for. And then others, your hallucinogenics, lovely cannabis, and again your novel psychoactives fit into that. And the novel psychoactives, the predominant ones we're seeing at the moment are stimulants and the cannabinoids, synthetic cannabinoids, so synthetic cannabis. Interestingly though, what we saw coming from Germany, and I'll move on to the next slide. So this is your chemistry exam for this evening. What this is just notifications from this wonderful organisation, and I really recommend everyone to have a look at this. It's the EMCWDA, it's the European Monitoring Commission on Drug Dependency and Addiction in Europe. So it's a European-wide organisation, all EU member states and associated member states feed into this, and you can actually look up what services are in each country with regards to drug addiction. But this is kind of their notification system, so I sit on this and they continuously tell me what is available, you know, what's new. So the first one here is phenotrazine, which is like it's a diet drug originally. It went out of fashion because it caused stimulation and it was seen as an abuse potential, so they moved it off the market. It's come back onto the market. Interestingly, they have slightly modified it. What that modification does, I'm not sure, other than we know it's stimulant. Equally, this one, the PHP, again, is a pyrrolidine compound. Again, a cathenione. We all know about catheniones being highly stimulants. Then you've got the pyrflavarone, again in the one that came out in early November. This one is an interesting one. It's a fentanyl derivative, and the problem with fentanyl derivatives is they tend to be a lot more potent than the original compounds. Any of you who remember, old enough to remember China White, when that was out, that was a fentanyl derivative that we actually weren't sure why people were dying so much. It was because it was something like 10,000 times more potent than heroin. So these drugs are very potent, and they seem to kind of mix their way around the legislation. So everyone talks, we have a legislation in this country, it's the Psychotropic Criminal Act. Yeah, fantastic piece of legislation, but these drugs are modifying so quickly, it's very hard to keep up. Like, for example, I give one at the bottom here, which is Mamba, Black Mamba. Mamba, it's a synthetic cannabinoid. We've got this AKB48, which is Clockwork Orange. None of these are legislated for that we can actually make them illegal. So they're available. Are they legal? Are they illegal? We're in that grey area of that they're neither legal nor illegal, they're not controlled. So it's a problem.
So how many of these do you think are available in the Irish market today?
I would say, well, most of these are. We have a huge problem with this up in the northwest towards Cavan.
Okay.
We had a big problem with this drug. I would say a lot of the pyrrolidine and pyrflavones are definitely here. We may not have these. This one, the phenotrazine, what we're finding is that the first countries that notify a lot of these are our Nordic neighbours and kind of the boundaries to Eastern Europe.
Okay.
So, and you not find that they do travel slowly acrosswards, that we do eventually get them. Whether we get these exact ones or whether a new one will be modified by the time it gets to Ireland is another thing. But the whole thing around this is that everyone goes, all the head shops are gone, you can't get these. You can get anything you want with regards to this. And even some of the products that head shops are selling online or even locally, technically may not be illegal, but are legal but not controlled. So it becomes very difficult how you manage this, and maybe one way around it would be to look at our medicinal legislation again, but that's a whole day's other job. But it's just to show that the drug market on the street changes very regularly. For example, I got in touch with the Garda Drugs Unit recently to ask what was a major thing, and we are having a problem at the moment with GBL, which is which when you take it causes a wonderful effect, similar to being highly intoxicated on alcohol, quite stimulatory. It increases the virility of males, females. It disinhibits people quite considerably. There could be an issue around sexual transmission of diseases because of it, because people become very disinhibited. It forms gamma butyric acid in the body, which is liquid ecstasy. So we know there's a problem with that in certain parts of the city. They're doing it at parties. The other thing is that another thing we're seeing a little bit of issue with is obviously some of our prescription drugs. Most notably, we're seeing a little bit of a problem with Lyrica, which I'll come back and talk about at the end, which is gabapentin, which we're seeing a little bit of a problem with. Again, it's very hard to say, is it because people like the effect if you take lots of them, a bit like any of you who would work in the field. I've clients who like to take a lot of lilies, as they call them, which would be olanzapine. A lot of them, they get a buzz similar to a heroin buzz off it, and we think that because of the way Lyrica works on the GABA receptors ultimately, that again is a benzodiazepine-like compound, and again the buzz of a benzodiazepine. So again, it changes so regularly that's why you break it down to stimulants, depressants and others, because it's just easier.
Okay.
So these are overdose statistics from 2004 to 2011. What's interesting is that our implication of what's been involved, that polysubstance misuse is involved in over 59% of all drug-related deaths. This is higher than our road deaths, and we all know how much money is being put into prevention of road deaths, how much money is being put into the prevention of For example, I'll give you an example of a heroin or opioid-related overdose, and we know very little. We've ran a demonstration study on naloxone to see if it was a good idea to bring it in for lay administration. There is very positive feedback from clients, so our service users themselves are very positive about it. We know that we've had, and I know you can argue about overdose, we've had 4 uses that we can definitively say, and 3 of those were service user to service user. So layperson to a layperson administration.
So you've been trialling naloxone?
Trialling is not the correct word.
Okay, correct me
Because
then.
trialling would be implying a clinical
Oh,
trial.
right,
So
okay,
no,
okay.
we've been looking at the effectiveness of using naloxone as lay administrator,
Okay.
as a lay administrator rather than a professional.
So you've been getting positive feedback from the
yeah.
communities in there, the drug,
Yeah.
the IVDU
Yeah.
drug users,
Yeah.
and have shown, not evidence, but there has been
There has
saves.
been saves where they've
Saves,
used it,
okay.
and the interesting thing is that people talk about, you know, drug users, that they won't get the whole kind of what they need to do, but it's amazing how many of them have followed literally as one client said to it was a drill you pumped into our heads. They follow the ABCN, as we call it, for so it would be ambulance, breathing, recovery position, and naloxone, which is naloxone. As I keep telling people, it's a lot of people say, oh, so it's a treatment. It's not. It's just a timeline to allow an ambulance to arrive for you lads to do.
To come and take over.
So that's the whole point.
And we've heard about naloxone and the 2015 guidelines coming in. So
yeah, the statutory instrument was changed is it a week and a half, 2 weeks ago now. I think it's SI 245. If any of you are fascinated by the law, it's changed naloxone. Not that it's completely available. What it's done is that, for example, let's say I'm a worker in a hostel and I have done the training that's been accredited, let's say by FEC, appropriate accredited training, and my organisation has been accredited. They have to list their organisation on the HPRA website, which is the formerly Irish Medicines Board website, to say that they can use naloxone at this site. So let's say the Bailey Lighthouse is a hostel.
Yeah.
So you have access to the naloxone, and you can actually go into a pharmacy, get that over the counter without a prescription.
Mhm.
So that's how they've changed it for that. And it's also changed that people can administer it provided they've done the appropriate training as well. So it makes it interesting from that perspective. The thing is that in Schedule 8, they've only scheduled for naloxone as an IM pre-filled syringe, not as an IN, which I know that in the ambulance service you use a MAD device attached to an injectable, which is all fine, and this is where I would argue in the community, if I administer it by intranasal, the guarantee that it may not work versus you may have other products there that will help with an ambulance there, whereas if I'm a mother and I'm trying to administer to my son and I give INN, I give too much and I waterboard them with too much going up the nose, they may not come around.
It is. I know from doing a bit of research in Boston and in New York when they tried it, they were giving them the 2 grams or the 2 milligrams in a 2 ml syringe, and there was a lot of runoff from it, such where we're giving it about 400 mics each time.
So the piece around it is that there would be this is where the medical legal stuff comes into play, that the use of a product that's intended for parental purposes being used in an alternative way, i.e. being used as a nasal device, could be problematic if anything went wrong. And that's where, our indemnity scheme would have said they had concerns around it. So, however, if tomorrow morning there was a nasal formulation properly made, that would be the formulation choice for me, because personally I would prefer not to have needles, to be adding more needles to the market.
And again, I mean, as I said on Bridget's talk, we've got some community first responders down in Killarney. If naloxone administration is going to become part of their approach to a patient now as well, we're looking to obviously involve those type of groups in administering naloxone, be it IN or IN or IM as such, so that's interesting.
And at the moment it's IM is the only listed drug in Schedule 8.
Okay.
So it's not listed as an IN
drug.
as yet.
As yet. Okay.
As yet, note the word I'm using, as yet. Yes. And the other thing is, you asked about MDMA, which was interesting. It was implicated in 11 deaths in 2011. You might also ask why are the stats so far behind. It's because we have to wait until the coroner's report is definitive, so hence they're so far behind. This is a very interesting graph. I highly recommend you go happily through it, but you'll see what's most interesting in this is this here. If you look at methadone, 113, rising to 113.
So we've gone from 40 in 2004
to
113 in 2011 of deaths from methadone.
Methadone being implicated in the death.
And I see here other opiates. Are they listening to it?
Other opiates are probably buprenorphine, MST, morphine sulfate, fentanyl, because I had one guy who loved to suck on fentanyl patches. Very interesting way of using them. So so if you look at all opiates, including heroin, which is ultimately an opiate, you're talking about over 50% of the deaths are actually opiate. There's an opiate involvement, which would mean that there's a use for naloxone, even if, let's say, as first person going to it wasn't sure, is it opiate or is it a mixed intoxication, you're better off trying to get rid of the opiate element. At least if you had naloxone, it might allow the person to come out of that kind of from that overdose state. Interestingly, you see benzodiazepines are highly implicated. With diazepam being Anzicam, Valium.
It's into a question we've just got from the OBI, big sitting there tonight. What are the blueies and whiteys and other such street names, and what are their effects? Is that going to be...
The blueies are, well, yes, are diazepam, Anzicam. So you've got 3 strengths of Anzicam. Blueies, 10s. It depends. Some people also refer to Rohypnol in its day was kind of a bluey purpley colour. You could say, thankfully, that's been removed off the Irish market. Is it available illegally? Most likely, yes. But it's not available through prescription. The blueies that people talk about, the whiteys, are most likely diazepam 2. Street value worthless, because a white tablet is a white tablet, very hard to distinguish. So the ones that people tend to sell and trade are blues and yellows. Yellows being 5 milligram diazepam, blues being 10 milligrams of diazepam. The other drug that people like is flurazepam, which is Dalmain. Dalmain is a very much favoured drug, particularly amongst our drug using population who are on methadone, who are on heroin. Their next drug of choice is always a benzodiazepine. Yeah. So it's always, if you notice, the combination of CNS depressants are always a risk of an overdose, and that is a problem with our particular population. So I would assume that that's what they mean by blueies and whiteys, or those particular drug class. I do cover them, but the whole thing around diazepam and benzodiazepines is that as a drug class they have a use. Don't get me, from pre-hospital emergency care, you do need your stezolids, you need your diazomols, so there, and you need what is the one for the mouth?
Buccal
midazolam. So there is use for these. The argument around these is that we probably have not appreciated how potentially problematic they would have been when they first came in to replace, you must remember, a very dangerous drug, which was the barbiturates. So that's an important point to that. Sorry. So if you look, CNS depressants, so I cover opioids, barbs, rarely available, benzos, general anesthetics, anticonvulsants, pregabalin and gabapentin would be included in that. So alcohol, love it. We love it as Irish people. It is highly implicated in drug-related death. So it is a problem drug. We know all about what intoxication on that is like, but the other one we need to remember is the other ones that we sometimes see are more, you could argue, down and out, who may take the antifreeze and the wood alcohols and the problems that causes versus good old ethanol, which is our distilled alcohol. So it's a much more significant drug. How it works, we're very unsure. We think it affects GABA. We also know it kind of solubilizes our membranes to allow things to passage more quickly. Again, a very interesting drug that in the first phase of taking it, you get kind of a heightened increase in kind of response, Dutch courage, and then after a while you slowly plummet downwards to like a state of intoxication. In Ireland, it's our first problem drug. There's no doubt about it in all our statistics. If I put alcohol up on a board, it would be way up here, and all the rest you'd be looking for them at the bottom. And that's why a lot of data, when you look at heroin, people go, oh my god, it's massive, but if I put alcohol beside it, you wouldn't see heroin on the board.
And it's the injuries that are related to the alcohol abuse that kind of bring it up then as well.
Yeah, and that's the big thing around the National Drug Related Death Index, is that they both look at traumatic and poisoning. That's how they differentiate it. And I've predominated on the poisoning, but I do recommend that if anyone's fascinated by the National Drug Related Death Index, to look up the HRB website. It's a very good resource for people to see where what's peaking and troughing over time. The new data is due out at the end of this month actually, for I think it's 2012, but it could be 2013, sorry, and one or the other, that it's the next round of data is due out. So the benzodiazepines, again, affects the wonderful GABA receptor. Gamma-aminobutyric acid essentially is like a lovely donut sitting on our nerve endings that swells up when it fits into it and slows everything down. First drug on the market was chlordiazepoxide, followed by a lot of others, and our mother's little helpers most likely are Valium, Anzicam, and we all heard with the loss of Roche Pharmaceuticals down in Clare, the largest manufacturers of Valium in the Irish market. Whether now we'll be importing them in from other states or not will be interesting.
Can I get a question to you?
Yeah.
Is that all right? So Niall Kenny, who's up in Drogheda, has come back and asked us a question. Which drug are we having a problem with in that general direction again? So was it the Clockwork Orange?
It was. It's a cannabinoid, a synthetic cannabinoid. It has been. We've got reports in that there's a problem with it. The biggest issue is that we hear kind of post often events that something has become a problem, and it's through often the A&E and people being admitted through A&E that they might report it back, or drug projects might say there's a problem. Like for example, as I said, in parts of Dublin, there's reports at the moment that cannabis is being sprayed with heroin. Again, I have got no evidence for it other than clients telling us. One client telling me they're definitively spraying it. In essence, a very clever way of getting somebody onto heroin, because heroin will burn beautifully with cannabis. Okay. You know, so I can't say. The other thing is that there's also a suggestion that some of the MDMA, so your ecstasy tablets, that they might have put a bit of some of the LSA, some of the lysergic acid amides on it, just to give you that kind of strobing effect, that if you take it you'll also get that kind of hallucinogenic side effect from it, other than just the MDMA on its own. The other thing is that there was a huge issue, if any of you remember, late last year, it could have been, with regards a huge report that there was a big problem with PMMA. Yes. And people were saying, oh, it's ecstasy. Yes, it's related to ecstasy, it is a stimulant, but the problem with it is that it's different to ecstasy for the user. The come on is different. It's slower onset, and what was happening was that if I was using it, I kind of go, I'm not getting my buzz on, so I need to take something. So they took more, so they actually died from taking too much of it rather than just giving it time to come up. And then there was a huge thing recently that crystal meth was abounding throughout Dublin.
Yeah,
it was everywhere.
Yeah.
There's been we've seen a little bit, nothing major. What we think it is again one of the cathenions. There's a very interesting one. It's a PVP, I think it is, that there's a very interesting journal, obscure journal, it's the Japanese Journal of Toxicology, if any of you are interested in looking at it.
Go buy it now.
Which looked at the user's effect and how it worked in receptors in mice, and that it compared to crystal meth was extremely similar. So and we definitively didn't find, and when the guards went to break up this group, they found that it wasn't crystal meth, that it was actually one of the pyroflavorone products that they were actually selling, which actually did give the user the same effect as crystal meth. And that's why a lot of users, when they say, I have users who tell me, oh, I got really great cocaine the other night, I went on for 45 minutes. Most likely that's an amphetamine-based compound. Cocaine would not last that. Good cocaine certainly wouldn't give you that buzz for that length of time.
Thanks, Denis.
Okay, so the benzos are these. And then the Z drugs are your good old Zimavanes, your Zopiclones. Some of you may have heard of the wonderful drug on the market called Zocs, Z-O-C-S. There was a fantastic guy making them with his own little tablet press. They were an amazing quality drug, actually, really well made for something that was not licensed on the market. What was in it? Hard to know. We definitely know there was Zimavane in it. There was suspicion that could have been ketamine in it. Suspicion only. Again, we never could determine whether it was in it or not, but what we did find was that there was a mixture of other benzos in it, but when users used it, they described it very like a ketamine effect. They went into almost a state of kind of couldn't move, that they just sat there, or they missed. One girl described to me as she missed days, she couldn't remember from it, so she got a huge amnesia from it. These drugs, benzos and Z drugs, although not chemically related, work very similarly. There's legislative change to control these, to make them a control drug, because at the moment they're not a control drug, they're just a prescription drug. That's just a few of them, and that's not all of them. So that's some of the side effects that you get from them. The most interesting one is this one here, paradoxical reaction. Just from your own perspective, I guess, if you come across someone, like this is all typical of CNS depressants, respiratory depression, vertigo, headache. The paradoxical reaction is interesting. We normally find that with those who love to binge. Yeah, sorry?
Do most of these small manufacturers, as it were, do they come up with the recipe themselves? From their own experience, do they sort of say, well, I like a bit of that? And,
what you normally find is that it's whatever they can get easily without it being caught.
Yeah.
Okay. like there's a couple of very good Chinese websites where you can buy a lot of this stuff and import it. And a lot of it, depending what you'll be told is if it's a controlled drug, there's a lot more controls obviously around it, import, export with regards to custom and excise. When it's not controlled, there's a little more difficulty around finding it. So for example, this is completely off this, but for example, steroids. We're having a definite increase in people using steroids. But if you ask custom and excise how many steroids are they coming across when they're checking through stuff, they'll say very little. But again, they'll say to you that it's because they're not checking for it because it's not controlled. So I would say if you went out to users, there's a lot of illegal steroids on the street. You know, and there's a lot of people using steroids, and a lot of people, you know, and using these drugs that we don't know how they're manufactured or where they're manufactured. The guy who's doing his own little press, it was more than just a little press, and I'm telling you, this was quite a big operation. The products he was using was whatever I think he could get in through without being hauled in through customs. So the problem with it is that I could never tell what the reaction would be to a client until they told me when they took it afterwards. I took this and this is how I felt, and it changed regularly about what effect it had. And that's the biggest problem with any of these. You know, I can say, oh, if this is in it, we'll do this. If this is in it, we'll do this. But sometimes there's this in it, and I don't know what it will do to the person. And I don't even know if it will do anything to you. You know, and also you must remember that a lot of the manufacture on this, for example, I got an email the other day saying there's been a run on caustic soda in one town, right? Caustic soda, we all know, yeah, it's really available. Caustic soda is very useful for manufacturing of crystal meth or for cocaine, or it's for changing the pH when you want to go from a base to an acid to form salt, to precipitate out. So there's been a run on it, so we're now seeing if this is one of the reasons. Is there a little manufacturing plant set up somewhere? Are they manufacturing crystal meth? Normally, if any of you like Breaking Bad will know they normally blow themselves up, which is a problem because they use a lot of kind of ethanol and stuff, which is quite, you know, they use a lot of flammable compounds. Their health and safety isn't the best. And caustic soda is part of that process, as it is for cocaine. But it's interesting that they had a run on it, and it came in from one of our drugs task forces, from like local shop providers to the task force, saying we are not stocking it anymore because it's been bought, and we think it's been bought for not the reason that caustic soda we think it's for.
Good.
Keep going?
Yeah, 100%, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
The questions are building up, so I'll leave it to the end because you can get through.
Okay, so sorry. So if I move on to opioids, obviously this is my area, you could argue, of expertise, but technically I argue on the addiction services. It's all areas, just because methadone is a replacement therapy, and that seems to be everyone's kind of, oh, it's methadone. We also use another drug called buprenorphine, which for any of you who, like Butrans patches, for example, is one of it. What we use is, if any of you remember good old Temgesic, a sublingual tablet. Buprenorphine is a sublingual tablet used for a replacement therapy for heroin misuse. Again, my argument around opioids is they all do the exact same thing to people. There's a intoxication. Methadone to a lesser extent than heroin, less goofing off, unless they're taking so much methadone that they're intoxicated on methadone. What you normally find is that you don't normally get a sole intoxication on methadone or heroin alone. There's always a combination with a benzodiazepine and alcohol and something else. There's always a mixed intoxication. We all know they're fabulous analgesics. Like, we do know heroin is diamorphine, the most perfect analgesic. They all cause gastrointestinal problems. The other problem with them is respiration. Methadone is a very problematic drug with respiration because it's actually one of the best antitussives. So cough reflex on the market, used in small cell lung cancer and treatment in end-stage cancers to stop an intractable cough. The other thing with opioids is obviously you get your miosis, pinning of your pupils. Some people get histamine-related effects, particularly with heroin. They get that flushing up their arms, kind of redness on their chest if they've used heroin. With opioids, again, if you look at how a heroin user uses it, it's normally, well, they can either smoke it or inject it, whichever mode they prefer. Why do people move from smoking to injecting? Very hard to know. Often it's down to the fact they can't afford, because they're actually smoking it really badly, in the sense that they're not using, sorry, this is really bad, they're not using a really high enough temperature, they're not inhaling it correctly. There's techniques. It's best if people want to use heroin, keep people smoking rather than injecting. So if we opened up safe injecting rooms, back to that argument, is that people should be taught how to smoke because smoking is safer than injecting heroin with regards BBV transmission, viral transmission, all of that. There is still a risk of viral transmission, obviously, from smoking heroin, but it's less than IVDU injecting. Or how they present themselves is, intoxication, goofing off, falling down, breathing slowing down, respiration rate dropping off. These are some of them. These are not all of them. From my experience as a pharmacist, I qualified in 1994. When I first came out of college and went into community pharmacy, I would have said to you we had very little controlled drugs. I could actually, off the top of my head, probably list off what was in our safe. Now we have so many opioid and opioid derivative drugs in safes, in pharmacies. I think one of our big growth areas, for want of a better word, is our prescription opiates and the potential and abuse around them. And our clients are very well in tune with that. In the UK, tramadol, for example, has been rescheduled into a controlled drug. Here it's still not it's not controlled. We are seeing problems with these drugs. We are seeing problems with our codeine, so our over-the-counter products. Is codeine the problem, or is it the other products that are in it? My opinion would be the ibuprofen and paracetamol is much more dangerous than actually the codeine, and we can argue that out as an argument, but for me that is more problematic. And how do we treat these? The ideal is you place them on a replacement therapy, be it buprenorphine or methadone. Codeine, to give codeine like for like is very difficult because it's very hard to determine, and also it's not licensed for that use, but it's also very hard to determine if they're topping up with other codeine products if you put them onto codeine. So that's why it's an awkward product. And MST is good old morphine sulfate. I haven't included oxycodone or oxycontin, but they're all in that drug class as well.
This is a big problem in the States at the moment, is the fentanyl.
Yeah, it's a lovely drug.
I did a couple of research in Canada, and it's a great drug. We're using it pre-hospital now, and it's great. It really, really is. We're giving it intranasally.
Yeah.
We're hoping to move to intravenous.
Yeah.
It's gone through our medical advisory council at the minute.
Yeah.
But I read an article recently about the police in America, in Canada especially, are having huge issues, and the number of deaths are increasing. Is it a case we're not reaching them in time because they're working so fast as regards to heroin?
It's short acting and potent. That's the problem with fentanyl. Well, it's not the problem. It's why we use fentanyl.
Yeah.
It's for like breakthrough pain. That's when you ideally use it. But because it's so short acting and people tend to take more of it, because it's so short acting, they tend, like as I told you about that guy with his Butrans patch, no, not Butrans, but his fentanyl patches, chewing on them, which is the perfect way to take it, because we all know the lovely lolly goes across the cavity, goes across the mouth. So he was getting a high buzz immediately off it, but he was sucking loads of them. It wasn't just one, he was like on 10, 12 at any one time. For him, the risk was that he was peaking and by the time an ambulance, if he went into OD, it would be it's too short, it's such a short acting. And that it is also a problem from a treatment perspective, because it's so short acting, to replace it with something very long acting like buprenorphine and methadone is very difficult, trying to get it right, because sometimes you can give them too much of these, because these, you must remember fentanyl, what is it, 4 hours at a push, duration of activity at a push.
Okay.
Methadone is 36 plus or minus 12 hours, buprenorphine is 48 plus or minus.
Okay.
So they're very long acting. Heroin is about, good heroin, if you talk to clients, will say 4 hours. They're saying quality is much better. That's a risk as well. When quality improves in our street, it is a risk of an overdose. The guards are saying it's improving, so we're no longer the toilet of Europe with regards to the quality of drugs.
It's interesting about the patches is that I've talking to some other colleagues. We're getting cases of people actually overdosing as such, trying to take their life by using the patches.
Yeah.
And it's something that I think is very relevant to the people who are watching it tonight, that if you do come across somebody who is in cardiac arrest, it is wise to expose the chest and see they have a number of patches.
Yeah.
And now obviously look for this guy who's chewing them like chewing gum.
But
look everywhere.
The other thing in the States is that anyone who's being prescribed long-term pain relief is also now being concurrently prescribed naloxone.
Yes.
Because they're not sure if the deaths are accidental or purposeful.
Okay.
Because if you look at the stats around prescription opiate deaths in the US, they were rising like this, and then they brought in really tight controls around prescribing. They're dropping off, but have a look at heroin. Heroin is creeping up behind it.
Okay.
So are people transferring over to heroin now because it's easier to get than actually getting prescription opiate? It's hard to know, but what they're doing in the States is, as part of this, is that naloxone will be co-prescribed, and they have a wonderful, if any of you have the cash for it, it's $500 for this wonderful naloxone. It's a talking device, it's an auto-injector, it's called an Avizio, and it tells you what to do. So the device talks to you, please place to the side of the leg, and it injects and does everything for you. $500, obviously we're not, as a nation, I think that would be quite an expensive route to go. But again, these drugs are interesting that it's all based on duration of activity, and you know yourself, anyone who's on pain relief, palliative care, are on multiplicities of these and combinations, and often because the pain isn't being hit, they're taking more and more, so their tolerance is going up and up and up all the time, and it's very easy to tip over from tolerance to overdose, you know, that they reach a therapeutic dose right into overdose. And then often you might find somebody who's on these, particularly palliative, will also be on a benzodiazepine to help them sleep or relax or calm them down, so there's a whole combination there. So we know that, I'm not going to even go down through this. This is part, just so you know, when we do training with, currently for the naloxone program, we do the observable signs of opioid overdose, and so people are aware how to recognise that before they give naloxone. And I'm touting our own services here, Drugs and Alcohol Helpline, which is the HSE Drugs and Alcohol Helpline, which is run Monday to Friday 9 to 5, and we'll give you a huge amount of advice on any medication, any drugs, services, etc., and similarly for drugs.ie. But this is just some of the observable signs, very important to note. Interesting that tonight it was said about the unrousable state was not as important as it used to be, that you had to do everything almost simultaneously. Yes. And I know that from doing the training, I always wondered why everything was so stepwise, that obviously you would call for help, do all of that almost as one event. So it's interesting that that's been changed in the new guidelines. I've put in ketamine because you asked.
Because I love it. Yeah, I think it's a great drug. Give me more of it. I'm telling you, every street corner, there's guys up there renting to me on street corners.
Yeah, it's a fantastic drug, like, there's no doubt about it. It has a really interesting, it's just interesting on how it works. How people describe it is probably more interesting, how they describe that feeling of almost like being an out-of-body experience, a bit like if you're coming off benzos very quickly, people would talk about having an out-of-body experience or being disassociated or disinhibited. Ketamine, the other thing of course is it stops them in their tracks, they just sit there like almost in a trance-like state. Hallucinations, again, from your perspective, I guess, people asking what will they look like, you'll have confusion, agitation, impairment of short, long-term memory, people not being responsive, just lying there, they might be breathing but they're not kind of moving for you. So have we seen a lot of it? I haven't seen a lot of it in the addiction services. Clients reported every so often to me saying, we got hold of a bit of ketamine, but they kind of used words like that rather than saying there's a problem out there. They would actually talk more about crystal meth being a bigger problem, or stimulants, amphetamines being a bigger problem than ketamine. But again, I would argue that some of the stuff that we were seeing home manufactured had some ketamine element to it, because some of the descriptors of it was just too like ketamine, if that makes sense to people. But interesting substance. How, I don't know, treating it, stop using it.
Yeah, I mean, no, we just found this year some of the festivals.
Oh yeah,
around
sorry.
the place. You know, that's where we were getting a lot of people on it, and they were really coming up on it big time.
Yeah.
You know, you kind of get your ecstasy case, you can handle it to a certain extent, you know, just to kind of monitor them and let them go through what they have to do. But ketamine was a different, I mean, I think we worked with a few cases this year with ketamine down in some of the festivals.
Zonked is the word,
yeah.
I think there are some positives to it though. It's very cardio and respiratory safe.
Absolutely,
yes.
So they tend to maintain their own
Yes,
energy.
yes,
I like that.
Yeah, and it's really like putting them in a safe place and monitoring them. Really, there's nothing more you'll do with them.
Yeah.
Whereas with heroin and methadone and benzos, it's a lot more different. The result, the problem with ecstasy then is it has its own, like, its side effect profile. It can be quite traumatic, from burning up, sudden cardiac event, blood pressure going through the roof. And whenever people ask me, what's the difference between cocaine, I'll move on to that, between cocaine and amphetamines, I always say to people, essentially they're the same, you'll get the same kind of result. Really depends on what quality amphetamine you get and what quality cocaine you get. A lot of the amphetamines, if you give it to a user and not tell them and manage to, because it's easy to make an amphetamine like cocaine, it's, it's very easy.
I have no idea.
It's very easy. And it's very hard for them to tell you which was cocaine and amphetamines.
Okay.
because it's a very similar turn on. They sometimes say cocaine is a much nicer one, but nicer is very subjective. Because it's very hard to tell what they mean by nicer. Some say it's not as hard a come down off cocaine, but I would argue that both are equally problematic as a come down, and that's where probably if you come across, if any of you follow the International Overdose Awareness Day is August 31st every year, and this year the IOAD were promoting obviously opioid overdose, and the other thing they were promoting this year was stimulant overdose, because it's predominantly Australian based, and they're seeing a lot more stimulant overdose in Australia versus opioid overdoses. Oh, sorry. I should put that. That's from the International Overdose Awareness Day. Recognise signs. I'm just saying responsive care, CPR. I have naloxone, fizanil. I know we in our addiction service used to always stock fizanil in our emergency box. We've removed it because we've been advised by our pre-hospital emergency not to have it because it confuses things for people. So we've removed it completely. We have naloxone, obviously, because primarily we're an opioid service, so obviously we have naloxone. Naloxone, if it becomes more available, it's great to have it more available, because if you're talking about over 50% of drug-related deaths are due to an opioid intoxication, we might save that amount. There's huge argument, and again I can go down a huge route on overdose in Scotland, where they're seeing even with naloxone being widely available, and it's been widely available through community for at least 5 to 6 years, they're not seeing a reduction in their overall numbers, because what they're saying is their opioid users are living longer, and actually into overdose and dying more easily of overdose the older they're getting. But what they're seeing is in specific cohorts, so your younger cohort, your prison release cohort, that they're actually saving lives. So to be very aware that naloxone may not cut the number by 50%, but it may help specific cohorts, because younger people often spontaneously, are much more adapted coming out of an overdose versus an older person. So our stimulants, MDMA, PMMA, I've put in nootropics because I think these are your cognitive enhancing drugs. So modafinil, seen it being used for. I've also seen it being used by students to increase their brain function. It's known as Viagra for the brain, because it increases people's ability, so they become more alert, more aware. Provigil is the brand name of the drug, but that would also include your Concertas, so your Ritalins would also be in that. So they're all equally, they can be abused to some extent, even though they are prescribed. So they are a prescription drug that people probably didn't think too much about, that they could be within this category. And then you've got cocaine and your types of cocaine, your freebase, crack base. We don't see a lot of freebasing or basing here, which is technically, the burning off of the vapors. We see a lot more crack and cocaine, pure cocaine hydrochloride, because cocaine hydrochloride is wonderfully water soluble, so easily injected. So that's why we probably see it. So we see withdrawal symptoms with discontinuation, fatigue, depression, disturbance of sleep patterns. We also see hostility and paranoia, and even drug-induced psychosis can be associated with these. So from your perspective, that might be something you might see with somebody who is on a stimulant buzz versus an opioid buzz, that they will be much more aggressive, much more out there. Like they describe cocaine, I think is a wonderful way to describe it, as a hedonistic drug. So like that implies that you're the best at whatever you want to be at that moment in time when you take it. I refer to it when people say they take it, it's like lighting up the Christmas tree lights on O'Connell Street. All your brain just goes wham. All your positive neurotransmitters are released in one big heavy pumping to the brain, and immediately you're alert. Your adrenaline is pumping, your serotonin is pumping, your noradrenaline is pumping. It's all fantastic, positive. You're even feeding into your dopamine. It's all a very positive effect. Obviously then I can't say that it's the best thing to take, because there's a downside, and the downside is you can have cardiac arrest. They're my users, they get DVTs because they like to inject. They develop the most beautiful abscesses stretching here to here. So there is problems with it. They develop septal defects, the whole lot. And the other thing is that body temperature and irregular heartbeat is the other thing to consider with regards to this particular group. How to treat them? These are what the OD signs look like from your perspective: chest pain, disorientation, headaches, obviously because of blood pressure shooting through the roof, seizures perhaps, high temperatures, overheating but not sweating, which is a very interesting thing. And as you said, with ecstasy people, you know how to look after them from keeping them calm, giving them water, not too much water in case they drown, making them sit down and relax, even though their agitation might be that they want to hop up and dance to every dance beat that they hear. Difficulty breathing is also an issue with some of these. Agitation and paranoia, obviously hallucinations can be very problematic, and particularly with a lot of the novel psychoactive agents that you get, we don't really know how much of that is there. Like for example, we had lysergic acid amide, which was it was a diviner sage being smoked, and it was lysergic acid amide. Everyone assumed it was more going to be like cannabis, but it was very like an LSD trip. So it made it a very interesting drug, and then obviously into a state of unconsciousness. Next, will I keep going, or do you want me to stop?
No, keep going, keep going.
Okay.
How's the show? Do you want some more?
No, I'm grand. So the next...
You've got 10 minutes.
10 minutes, great. So the next thing is just... So I hope that is like a very whistle-stop tour through drugs. What I'm saying is that the drug market will always hold your classics. Your classics being heroin, cocaine, and amphetamines. The interesting thing about amphetamines is that they can change. They're a really easy drug to modify. In the sense that they can make whatever they like, and then you've got your cathenions, your original cathenion, and you might see this particularly in certain ethnic minority groups, is cat. Mm-hmm. So you might see that, or betel nut, which is the other one that you see, and they're your traditional stimulant drugs. And if you you'd also see the linden tree which, if you want to really find the bark, there's a couple of them around parks in Dublin. If you take the bark off and suck off it, you'll get an amphetamine buzz off it. Again, if you want to try it, be my go out and try it. It's there, but it is a natural source drug. And of course, then I haven't even included a lot of the other drugs that are out, like the magic mushrooms, the other mushrooms that people misidentify very badly, often leading to huge problems, particularly with fly agarics and those type of mushrooms. With regard to cannabinoids, these are interesting because of the fact that we've moved into a synthetic cannabinoid stage. So we've always said, oh, cannabis is cannabis is cannabis. Fine cannabis when I remember in college when I was doing it with Des Corrigan, cannabis resin was cannabis oil was 60%, cannabis resin was about 20% THC, and just your good old weed or marijuana was only about 2%. And even at that was really good really good weed. Now you're talking about, the guards will say they can get it up to about 40% THC. Wow. Which makes it a very interesting drug, and a drug that a lot of us kind of go, it's just cannabis. And not my problem with cannabis, my issue with cannabis is that this is again goes along with the legalization, whether it should be legalized or not, is that it's if we're to legalize it, I would like our alcohol policy to be more robust. That would mean that under 18s would not access alcohol, because then I'd be arguing that if cannabis was to be more widely available on a similar system to, let's say, Colorado or to Amsterdam, over 21s, I'd like to make sure that was enforced. Okay, but I would argue that we can't even enforce our alcohol policy. How would we then expect to enforce a cannabis policy?
So from the percentage aspect, from the percentage you're talking about, 40% now, we're looking at possibly 40% of what's out there. What is the percentage of the prescribed cannabinoids that's out there that's being pushed from a medicinal purpose?
There's only one product on the market, and I'm not sure if it's actually available here yet, because it's called Satvix. And if any of you follow the wonderful law, it was SI 323, Statute Instrument Change, where they allowed the use of cannabis. Did you? Yeah. It was a fascinating read. It talked about the use of cannabis for certain clinical indications, muscle spasticity being one of them. The issue around is who can prescribe it will be the next issue. Is it potential for misuse? What the company have said is that they've included THC, which is tetrahydrocannabinol, and cannabidiol. There's argument out there, and again, I can't say there's suggestion, and a lot of evidence suggests that the fact that if you use cannabidiol with THC, cannabidiol has a neuroprotectant factor versus tetrahydrocannabinol. What's happening with, for example, synthetic cannabinoids is that there's no cannabidiol stuff around cannabinoids. So you're talking about 5 or 6 years ago, being in a significant distressed, paranoid, psychotic state, and they found out it was really down to these synthetic cannabinoids, and they believe that it might be that the neuroprotectant factor of cannabidiol wasn't in it. The new compound that will be available is a nasal spray. it's refrigerated item. Now, unfortunately, and I'm not sure, you might be able to tell me this, I've never come across a controlled drug safe that's refrigerated. This is a controlled drug Schedule 2. So it'll be way up there with methadone, with heroin, if heroin was licensed in this country, with all your high top drugs. So it will be a controlled drug Schedule 2, step down from Schedule 1, which is essentially drugs of misuse with little or no clinical use. Okay. So we've moved one step down, so it means very much controlled, monitored, from pharmacy, script has to be handwritten, words, figures, the whole lot, recorded out in it. But if it's a refrigerated item, I still don't know how a community pharmacy, for example, will be able to hold it, because I haven't seen a controlled drug fridge.
Yeah. True.
But it will, if it becomes available, the suggestion is that you come in for it, Glenn, and me as the pharmacist will order it and tell you to come back in and hand it out to you immediately on it arriving in, so I don't have to hold it on site. It'd be interesting to see if it leaks out of the black market, and if we're really honest with ourselves, the answer will be yes, it will. How much will leak out? I'm not sure. It will be interesting to see. I'm not sure I've seen some of the formulations, and one formulation was a very interesting one that when you sprayed it, it mixed the both together into one vessel. So it'd be interesting that if I was clever enough, can I take off my cannabidiol and just have pure THC? So I'm not sure if that can be done. Yeah. I'd like to see, I haven't seen the formulation up front, but it's a very interesting substance, and we have changed our legislation to allow for it. But I as yet haven't seen it available, but I've had 2 pharmacists phone me how to get it for patients that have requested it. And again, there's a whole confusion about who can initiate the prescription. Okay. Yeah. But anyway, we've got our phytocannabinoids, so plants, endocannabinoids, believe it or not, we have our own lovely endogenous endocannabinoid, which is anandamide, and then the synthetic cannabinoids, which are the spice products. You know, in the head shop, hazy days of head shops, you could go in and buy your incense stick, which you burnt, obviously, but you crushed and smoked. And if any of you ever ventured in there, they were the most amazingly, it was probably one of the biggest confusions for, and I hate using the word normal people, but people who may not have tried drugs, because they saw it as, oh, it's just from a shop, it's labelled to say it does this and this. Like, for example, if you went in and got a bath salt, one of the cathenions, what it said was, if you use this, ensure the vessel is full of water and do not drive or operate machinery. Now, I'm not sure how many people here actually drive or operate machinery while putting a bath bomb into their bath. So a lot of the information on it was very cleverly, that didn't say you can use this way, but advised people about safe measures around harm reduction. And equally with the cannabinoids, they were sold so that you didn't smoke them, but when you read the label on it, it was very clever. And when the laws started changing around it, the drug manufacturers, illegal, were very clever in very quickly modifying that it was outside of the illegal compounds. Like, I remember when the first lot of cathenions became illegal, pyroflavones came onto the market. Pyroflavones are originally used for swimming pool cleaners, you know, and they came on. One of them was called NRG. Now, anyone would know what that means if you take it. It means, you know, it's going to be a stimulant, without even knowing what it was. So that's what made the head shop phenomena a very interesting piece of our history, really, with regards to our drug use in history. Yeah. So there's 500 different chemicals in the plant. We've 70 cannabinoids. THC is your euphoric, your phytogenetic and your anxiogenic, and your CPD, which is cannabidiol, is your anxiolytic and antipsychotic. So that's your protectant. Then you've got chemovars. So any of you, we had someone from Wexford here, I should have teased them. They have a wonderful hemp farm down in Wexford. Don't bother going down trying to smoke it, you won't get any hit off it. There's very little THC, they're all male plants. The male is very poor at producing THC, it's the female plant, and that's where a lot of the increase in productivity and enhancement of the plant has come over variants of changing the female and doing plant culture. So if they got a plant that was high concentration, they plant cultured it, so they're no longer using, you know, the usual techniques of pollen. They're actually culturing the plant, taking slips off the plant and growing the mother plant. So it's essentially like Dolly the sheep, but in plant world, that's what they're doing. And then you've got a drug type, and then your intermediate type. And what we're seeing is that this is changing. THC is upping, your CPD is dropping down. So that's what we have at the moment. This is the one of choice is people call it skunk, pollen, weed, not, you know, a lot of this, as a harm reduction measure, if we're talking to clients and they're using a lot of this, we tell them to move back to cannabis resin because it's less concentrated. Again, you can argue you're still telling them to use the drug, but at least they're using less. The biggest problem with a lot of these is that we're not only talking about just cannabis being in it, but it's the mix of all the other chemicals in it with regards smoking.
Huge percentages figures here.
Yeah.
30%, 2%, 10%.
And the other thing what's interesting is that if you look at a lot of the reference papers on cannabis smokers, a lot of them have a great lung volume. They have really healthy lung volume that they have to hold it in. So they're kind of, it's really bad. Well, you know, it is when they blow in, but there's all the other complications. I normally sell it on, particularly on men, is that it give it the desire but take it away the performance, a bit like too much alcohol. So if any of you like Shakespeare, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So, and also it can cause hormonal imbalances, so a little bit of shrinkage sometimes. My biggest issue with it is that, particularly in adolescence, is that huge Yale study which linked it very conclusively with psychiatric events in later life in younger populations because of the lack of the affecting the neural network development. So that for me makes it automatically, I'm worried that if it became so widely available that it becomes normalised, because, and I keep going back to the alcohol argument, we haven't been able to manage alcohol, now we're putting in another drug that we're still not sure about its full ramification. It has a use, but how we manage that is very dependent on having a very robust strategy around it. So it affects receptor sites in the cerebellum, short-term memory and learning, reaction coordination. So again, you know, you're talking about alcohol fall slips. This will be the same. The other thing is a very good ad, I don't know if you've seen it, is the Ask Frank ad, where the guy who starts smoking cannabis and they shows all the different Franks, you know, happy Frank, psychotic Frank, angry Frank. And that's what I find fascinating about this drug, that opioid receptors will depress this. With this, a lot of it depends on your situation, where you're using it, and your own temperament at the time of using it, which makes it for me a fascinating drug, that it actually is not necessarily what action it has, but it also depends a lot on your mood and where you're at and how you do it. The other thing is that obviously mental health issues, there is criteria for dependence and withdrawal, there's no doubt about it. Respiratory system, again, as I said, it's interesting that it talks about the volume being much better than with those who smoke it, but then there's other issues around the effect that it has on the lung capacity and the hormone modulatory effects. The skunk and pollen, and again, this is white witch, for any of you who want to know the identifier of this chemovar. You can go online and decide if you want what seed you'd like of this particular plant. The seeds are sold very easily, because you must remember, interestingly, if any of you are health food freaks, hemp seed is one of the best omega-3, omega-6, linoleic acid combination products you can find. Buy a hemp seed. The minute you decide to sprinkle it on the garden path and see what grows from it, that's when it becomes, you've moved into the, why can I buy as a health food source of these oils, but once you start growing it, and female, but that this is the whole around it. It's very, very capable chemists, pharmacists, whoever you want to say, involved in it, well able to ensure that the quality of the product they're producing would produce top quality product, i.e. high concentrations of THC. So what they're getting is they're getting more schizophrenic symptoms and delusions versus the hash groups. This was done in a BMJ study. They were getting, the higher levels were leading to greater depression and anxiety, so linking it with that there is a significant effect on mental health, poor memory states, and the cannabidiol definitely had some sort of protecting effect. Couldn't tell how, and what a lot of the studies came from was from those German A&E studies where they looked at people coming in on just synthetic cannabinoids being very aggressive, very paranoid, versus if they had taken just cannabis or weed on its own and not these synthetic cannabinoids. And the problem with these synthetic cannabinoids, if any of you look them up, is that they're all like Abaca, Kibaka, they've huge long names, all have at one stage or other being involved with some sort of trial drug for use for pain relief. Particularly, a lot of them were thought they'd be really good for pain relief drugs.
How many have you left?
One slide. Skunk and psychosis, I've already talked about that. Sorry. Is there a risk of mental health? I've said that, let's say about 12 times at this stage. But the other thing is that the unpleasant psychotic-like symptoms were 1 in 7 for those who used it regularly. What do I mean by regular? Very hard to know. How will they develop it if they use it once? I don't know. We all know people who've used cocaine or an ecstasy tablet once and had some cardiac episode and died because of it. I can't tell if one person using it once will get it and not get it, or another person, and how much they use a whole daily or needed daily use. And we're talking about people who are using this like in the morning when they get up to relax, in the evening when they go home to relax. So it's like they're using it quite regularly. Many thanks.
Brian, thanks very much. Any questions from the audience?
Research into the background of why is it accidental, intentional?
That's interesting. We have looked at that because obviously that has implications for services. What was interesting is that I think it was over 60% of those who died, who had methadone in their system and died, were actually not in treatment.
So it's from selling on and take homes and.
So then you could argue that we're too geflúrseach, too plentiful with our take-home methadone, and we might need to tighten that up a little bit more. And in light of that, the HSE, in conjunction with the colleges, so the Irish College of General Practitioners, the College of Psychiatry, the Addiction Services, and the Pharmaceutical Society have come together to draft guidelines about best guidelines and best practice around the provision of take-homes, how to prescribe methadone, appropriate interventions. Because, like, for example, I'll give you an example. For me, I have a client who's, he's opiate stable in the sense that he's using nothing else. Now and again, you'll see a little bit of alcohol pop in, right? But he's homeless. He should not get takeaways because he's homeless. So where is he going to store his takeaways? So someone like that would be inappropriate for takeaways. So I think we need to move away from the fact that stability isn't just being opiate stable, it's also the social stability associated with that. Like I had one girl who she asked me, I'm storing my methadone in the fridge. I immediately asked for the doctor to remove her takeaways because she was storing them in an unsafe place. We have to ensure that our patients have a locked cupboard, locked box that they store their takeaways in. We even ask patients to bring in that before we give some of them takeaways. Now, the thing around it is that there is evidence that we need to look at our takeaways. What was interesting is that how are they accessing methadone? As you said, the only way is take-homes. So the argument there is that are people self-detoxing? We're not aware of it. And you might then say, but you take urines to beat the band. Yes, we do. But urines are only valuable that they'll tell me that there's methadone in the system, there's cocaine in the system, there's benzos. It won't tell me I took 80 mils of methadone. Definitely that tells me I've taken it. It's not that clear-cut. We just know you've taken it. So you might have decided, I'm on 80 mils and I've detoxed down to 50 mils. So the rest of the 30 mils is being given somewhere else. So it's a very awkward. It's something that we're concerned about, and it would be interesting to see if the data is still rising. Now we do know that methadone itself is picked up a lot more regularly in coroner's reports because of its long-acting. It's so long-acting. So that could be another issue. So it's hard to say. But what's more interesting is 68%, I think, is the right value, were not in treatment at the time of death. So that's a concern. So would that particular group, then we have started the target with the initial round of naloxone, for example. So that was our first target group, was that particular group who weren't in treatment, but who went to the fringes of our services.
Okay, I'm going to hit you some questions, okay?
Okay.
Quick fire. LIT Clonmel wants to know, how do you see the training being implemented with general public for the naloxone?
Well, that's the general public is anyone. So we're hoping that would be done through an accredited body. So as I said earlier, FEC will accredit a body to do it. For example, we're using amongst the drug service the National Family Support Network. So they're doing a lot. There's 3 in the National Family Support Network that are trained trainers, and in actual fact, from my perspective and training, it's the first time that I felt that you actually saw what it meant for people to access a product like this, rather than often, because when you're like a pharmacist, you're okay, tend to maybe cold white matter fact, whereas in this you could actually see the reality on the ground. So that's how most likely we'll go out through organisations like that. The other way that will be hoped to be put out through will be obviously through task forces, through addiction services, through, as I said, anyone who can be accredited. And I know I keep saying FEC, but FEC has a really good process of accreditation, and that's how I think a lot of it could be rolled out.
Can you explain the half-life of naloxone?
Very short.
Okay.
Less than 20 minutes, I would say, and that's the problem with it. It's naloxone. Naltrexone, being a different drug but related, is a longer acting drug, and we often use it post-detox as an oral formulation. There is an unlicensed product available as an implant, and again has caused problems with regards families insisting on their kids going off getting it done. They go off to Portugal, come back with a beautiful tan with an implant in, come back looking to get methadone again. Obviously they have an implant in, you can't get it.
Yeah. Okay, from Darren Gagan wants to know what were the effects and presentations of people inhaling lighter fluid or gas?
Butane. There's a very interesting, actually, very short, well, they quite agitated, a bit stoned would be, it depends, usually it's butane that they're after in it. There's a very, if you go onto www.drugs.ie, they have a huge piece on butane gas abuse, particularly in northern inner city Dublin amongst particular youth population, and they've developed a safety leaflet around that for people. It tends to wear off very quickly, and they tend to use more and more. The usual things you'll see is very bad sores around eyes, mouth, running eyes, quite agitated, a little bit delirious, and almost like they're goofing off. So sorry, I should have left. I had volatile substance in there, and I did remove it. It comes in under CNS depressants. So just take it as it will depress your CNS.
Okay. Just want to give a shout out to Ziggs. This Alberta, Canada ski patrollers are enjoying it very, very much, and thanks very much. So hello to Alberta in Canada for joining us. Thank you. Let me see.
Any jobs?
Yeah, any jobs. People watching from all over the world. It's really amazing to see it. You know, Calder Valley, Alaska Mountain Rescue looking in. It's unbelievable. I can't believe this. A very good presentation on the drug statistics. Great interest here in Waterford. It's very, very interesting in your talk, Denis. Let me just continue on. See if we've got anything else going on. All ears. No, I mean, while I'm looking through here, one of the questions I have for you is, what scares you at the minute?
The fact that things are modifying so quickly and very hard. You might come to me and say, we found this in someone, can you get it analysed? And I'm looking at it going, it could be anything. What I normally ask people is, what were they like when you came across them? Do you think it was injected, smoked, inhaled?
Yeah. Okay.
So that's I think that's what scares me the most. Also, what's scaring me a lot is that I think even though people say heroin is gone, it's the comeback kid at the moment.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Two people with the same question: Gavin Doyle and Ballantyre, and also we've got Rory Conlon from Cork is asking, have you heard about PERBs and or Red Bulbs? So that's PERBS and
No.
Red Bulbs.
No.
Watching in Cork Civil Defence.
No, but tell them I can find out. That's easily done. I normally send out a tom-tom to the system. So
Excellent.
if you get contact, I'll get it for you.
Fiona Kenny says, very interesting talk by Dr. Denis Driscoll, very enjoyable, thumbs up. And Grania Ryan, excellent insightful talk given by Dr. Denis Driscoll from all in LIT Clonmel, a very big thank you.
Anyone from Cork saying welcome.
Dr. Cork, I can't see that.
Some that, you know, they should be really supportive of a Cork man in Dublin, you know.
Some hospitals very selective and rare, present for those wondering if they're used. Okay, so I mean the feedback is absolutely excellent. So Denis, thank you very much for
and I've left my mobile number there because I'm
so at 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, you can ring this number.
The whole thing is that if somebody comes across something and they want it, and they can, if they have a sample of it and they're trying to get it analysed and nobody wants to analyse it, I'm very interested in finding out that product because I send it into the Garda Drugs Unit, who then send it to the state lab.
Okay.
So we actually do, it takes a while, but we do test where we can if we get holds of samples. And you're probably at the forefront.
No, I mean what we're finding now in say some of the festivals that we'll be involved in around during the summertime, the guards are there and we are sending samples off to get samples, and we're always trying to get, when we get a certain drug, we'll find in day one a huge amount of them coming in through the gates, and we're straight away, we've never heard of that, like where are we going to ring, where are we going to go? And I'd be talking to some guys in the UK, the names escape me at the moment, I ring them straight away and say, look, I have this drug, what have you heard about it? And there's a lot of blogs online where we have drug users will put up the effects of it, how they found the high,
the
if
drugs
it's bad,
forum
good.
is fantastic.
Drugs forum, so So stuff like that.
Blue light is another very good one. It's run by service users and moderated.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's the important thing. It's moderated, which means that okay, you come across and kind of go, really, is it? But it's moderated. When it's moderated, you cannot. I won't be guaranteed that the information is 100% correct, but it's nearly always factual to some extent. There might be a little bit of blowout by people saying, got a fantastic buzz off this.
Yes.
But like, there's a lot of it is moderated.
You're getting end users feedback basically, and something that nobody else wants to do.
Yeah.
Dennis, thank you very, very much again. You gave up your time, and thanks for your kids coming in as well. It's really good. So, I know at this point what I've said to the centres is if you want to have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or straight do your legs, wherever you have to do, go to the toilet, go and do it now. Press pause. We're going to be continuing on the next 2 minutes, and feel free to come back and join us for the Dr. Sinead Bhraonain, who's going to give us consultant in emergency medicine, the unintentional overdose, which will be different to Denis's talk. So see you soon. Thanks, guys. So welcome back everybody. At this stage you're probably all still having your cup of tea. Some of you could have joined us again, but we're going to kick off so we can get going. And when you can come in anytime with any questions. I'll hold the questions to the end, and we'll see how time goes down. But you're very welcome back. And now I'm joined by Dr. Sinead Bhraonain, who is am I getting that correct, Sinead? Thank you. Sorry, in emergency medicine, and has great plans for the future, and is a lady we're going to see a lot more in pre-hospital care in Ireland. Enthusiastic, very in touch with what's going on the ground, and to really appreciate it. I know for myself, handing over to you in the emergency department, it's a breath of fresh air when we come in and find someone who knows exactly what we're doing on the streets and is able to appreciate as well. So I want to thank you for that. Thank you for coming along and being the last speaker of the night, alright? So Sinead is going to give us a bit of a lowdown in regards to unintentional overdoses. We're finding it now in the community where a lot of polypharmacy is happening at home, and being medications where aren't aware of what's going on with their own health and continue to take medications. So Sinead, I'm going to hand the floor.
The conditions are a little bit better tonight. Thanks very much to Robin and D4H Technologies for having us here tonight. So I'm going to talk a little bit about overdose and poisoning, and typically medications that we would see that we can buy over the counter or that our patients will be prescribed regularly. So just a bit of overview. I'm acutely aware that we have different levels of audience participation, from EMT level up to advanced paramedic, so I've tried to include something for everybody. Forgive me if it's a bit too simplified, but I like keeping things simple. So we'll start off with a bit of an introduction. We'll go through the epidemiology of poisoning. I'll go through a bit of classification. We'll have a look at overview and risk factors for deliberate self-harm and carbon monoxide. I've been listening in for the last 2.5 hours. This Homer Simpson moment. Put on your glasses if you want to go to sleep. I won't be offended. Overdose is a huge problem in emergency medicine. Aspirin, plants, little things are the bane of our. So washing powder tablets, they look lovely. They don't taste so nice. To be observed for hours in our departments. Cleaning. The overdose can cause significant.
Connection's gone down.
No worries.
We'll just stop there. Now we've no internet. Stop using me. Using wireless, are you? Yeah.
No, I'm not. I'm only on Wi-Fi. There's nowhere.
It is.
Have we stopped talking yet on it?
Want me to send out a thing on this?
Yeah. Pause. There we are, back up there now.
Yeah. Yeah, we should be alright now.
Okay.
Wait, what picture are we on? There we go.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'll come back to the people in court later on. So one of my own personal favourites, the Oompa Loompa. So over the last couple of years we've had a lot of patients presenting to emergency departments having bought fake tan injections on the street, and they come in looking like this. And the big thing with these people is, the biggest worry of all is adrenal suppression. So they come in hypotensive, tachycardic and very unwell. So it's a big problem we're seeing. Made the Irish Times a couple of years ago. Big things that we worry about would be carbon monoxide poisoning causes fatalities, or tricyclic antidepressants. Analgesics account for about 32% of fatalities. The most common overdose we see in Ireland and the UK is paracetamol. Now, to buy enough to cause patients who, so about 70,000 cases every year in the UK. Half of the cases of liver failure in the UK are due to paracetamol, and they're patients who warrant liver transplants. So it's a huge problem. In Ireland, Ireland ranks number 6th in Europe for overdose. In the UK, about 12% of all medical admissions are due to overdose. And in the USA, the commonest cause of death due to poisoning is carbon monoxide, so the silent killer. So it's important to think about it. So how do we classify poisoning? So we can divide it up into one of 5 categories. It can be deliberate. So who are these deliberate self-harmers? So these are typically overdose of medication. It can be accidental, these are usually children, so typically boys, and they're aged approximately 2 years old, so inquisitive toddlers. Other forms will be non-accidental poisoning, so very important to always think non-accidental injury, especially in children, a form of abuse. iatrogenic poisoning, so doctors like me over-prescribing, causing iatrogenic poisoning, and then obviously you're homicidal. So poisoning in adults, so it tends to reflect the prescribing pattern, so what we as doctors are prescribing to patients in the community. The majority of patients who are poisoned, it happens in the home. 2/3 of these adults have been prescribed this drug for themselves or for a relative. And the most common drug of overdose would be paracetamol, followed then by NSAIDs such as ibuprofen. So what are the risks of self-harm or poisoning? It depends on the drug availability. So if the drug is very easy to obtain, it's definitely going to be one they're going to take. Social support. If there are a lot of stressful life events such as marriage break, divorce, migration, illnesses, all of these contribute to risk factors for DSA. So no matter where you are or what level you're practicing at, so you need to recognise the poisoning by which agent has been involved, and then move on from there. And I'm going to talk a little bit later on about supportive care and management. So how do you approach it? So it doesn't matter whether you're the consultant, the registrar, the intern, the advanced paramedic, or the EMT. Everybody should have the same approach to the poisoned patient. So you need to assess the airway, and I'll go through it all in further detail as we go along. You need to check their breathing. What's their respiratory rate? What's their saturations? Check their circulation, so their blood pressure, their heart rate. Check their disability, their GCS, and don't forget the glucose. So the aims of our treatment is to stabilise, to improve, to prevent complications, and to prevent any future episodes. So moving on to the airway. So I think the most important thing of the whole talk is the airway. Anybody can open an airway. You don't have to be a medic to do this. And it's the commonest cause of death after poisoning. So what do? Very simply, you can lift up the chin. You can do a jaw thrust. Have a look inside the mouth. Is there something that's occluding the airway? Can you suction out some secretions? Is there something you can remove? This is very simple, and this can save their life. So forget your naloxone, forget your N-acetylcysteine. This is what's going to save your patient's life, opening up their airway. So sniffing position, jaw thrust, you might need to put them head down, turn them on the left if they're vomiting. Have a look in their airway, clear out the secretions. And then you may well consider doing a rapid sequence intubation, whether pre-hospital with a practitioner or in hospital with support. The next thing, once you're happy with your airway, what you're going to do is move on to your breathing. So you may well want to apply supplemental oxygen with a non-rebreather mask. Attach them to a monitor. What is their respiratory rate? So if they're hypoventilating, they have a low respiratory rate, it can give you clues as to what you might think they may have taken. Have they taken opiates? Are they hyperventilating? Have they taken aspirin? Have they taken sympathomimetics like ecstasy, PMMA? If their respirations are inadequate, you may well need to support it with a bag valve mask ventilation. So very important, focus on your A, focus on your breathe. Check your respiratory rate, have a listen to their lung fields. So if there's diffuse wheeze, you worry about, for example, aspirin in asthmatics, can you give them some salbutamol? If there's bronchorrhea, lots of secretions, consider some atropine. If they have severe stridor, then you have impending airway obstruction, so whether you need to go ahead and intubate them, and obviously with a practitioner present. From a circulation point of view, what is their heart rate? What is their blood pressure? So are they tachycardic? Do they have a high, fast heart rate? Have they taken ecstasy, sympathomimetics? Have they very slow heart rate? What is their blood pressure? And then what you need to think about from then is, do you need to obtain an overdose of beta blockers, for example, and they're very hypotensive? What does your CPG on page 45 say to you? It says to you that you may well need to obtain IV access to treat their hypotension. And when you're happy with your ABC, then you're going to move on and check their disability. So what's their GCS? What's their eyes doing? Are they making any verbal responses? And do they have any motor responses? And never forget the glucose, which is really easy to treat. I think it's really important, if you can do the A and B very well, you know, C will come. But it's very important for you guys at the scene to look for clues. So when they come into hospital to us, we haven't seen where you found them. We don't know the exact circumstances. There's always lots of people at the handover, so it can be difficult to find all the information. But you guys have the power to find the clues. Always think decontamination. So practitioner safety first. So make sure you're safe, your scene is safe, and then your patient's safe. Do you need to remove their clothing? Do you need to irrigate them? Do you need to wash them down? So I think we all would aspire to be like Dr. House and to channel him, whereas in reality we're more like Homer Simpson. So I think it's important that use your environment, look for clues. Now I want to thank Andy Neal and Anya Mitchell for giving me this slide on loan. So I'm just, from now on, I'm going to use a tool to go through the rest of the talk. So important to do a risk assessment, supportive care, we'll go through investigations, decontamination, elimination, and we'll go through some specific antidotes. So this is me in Electric Picnic. I was very happy because it's 7:30 p.m. on the Sunday night and I'm going home shortly. So I think the important thing about risk assessment is taking your history. So what did they ingest? What was the ingestant? What was the dose of it? What time did they take the substance at? That's really important, especially paracetamol. What kind of clinical features do they have? Are they breathing very fast? Are they breathing very slow? Is their heart very fast? Is their heart very slow? And what other patient factors do we know? Do we know their weight? So if I took 12 paracetamol versus Glenn taking 12 paracetamol, so is there a difference? So we need to know their weight and do they have any underlying comorbidities? So as part of risk assessment, when did they take it? What did they take it? How much did they take? Did they take anything else? And do we have any previous drug history? Have they done this before? Have they any other medical history, psychiatric history? And then when they come to hospital, we'll do an assessment about capacity. The history is often very unreliable, you know, so it's important to look for clues in your environment. If you can get a collateral history from any relatives or people who are nearby, very important to us. When you're happy with your history, the next thing to look at will be your physical examination. So have a look in their eyes. Are their pupils dilated? Have they taken a sympathomimetic like ecstasy? Are their pupils constricted? Have they taken an opiate? Do they have very fast? Is their skin very dry? And have a look at them as well. And then can you get any clues from your environment? So are there any odours such as garlic, you'd be worried about arsenic poisoning, or bitter almonds, you think about cyanide. So look for clues in your environment. And then have a look at your patient. So if you can't find anything in your environment, have a look at your patient because you'll soon figure out what's going on with them. So look in their eyes, have a listen to their chest. What's their temperature? Check their blood pressure, their heart rate. So A, B, C, keep it simple. My next slide just goes through you can group up into different groups of drugs. So Dr. Driscol spoke about this earlier. So your anticholinergics typically present with tachycardia, hypertension. Your opiates, bradycardia, hypotension, reduced pupils, increase on every course. So going back, so we've done our risk assessment. Next thing to think about is your supportive care. So again, your A, B, C, D, E. So go through, check what's your airway, is your airway patent? If it isn't patent, suction out some secretions. What's your respiratory rate? What's your oxygen saturations? Have a listen to their chest. From a circulation point of view, do you need to obtain IV access? I'm going to keep saying this over and over again because I don't think we do the basics very well, and this is what's going to save your patient's life pre-hospital and in hospital. So when they come to hospital, we do a few more investigations. We get an ECG, a 12-lead ECG. We attach them to cardiac monitoring. We do a lot of urine tox screens in the matter. We can do blood investigations, so we can check their liver function, their kidney function. We can do a venous blood gas, which will tell us about their pH. We can do paracetamol and a salicyclate blood test on them to see what their levels are. And the next thing on the list, so we've gone through our risk assessment or supportive care investigations. The next thing would be decontamination. So it's to reduce the absorption of any poison. So you may well, first of all, protect yourself and protect others. So you need to avoid any exposure. So remove the exposure from the patient. You may well need to irrigate them copiously, either their skin or their eyes. And the next thing you're going to do is find some help. So what we do would be to look for, if we're not sure what the drug is, routinely we would look this up on all our patients. So we would go to the ToxBase website. And what that will, the other thing on the bottom, and they're always very calls, and they will give us information on what to do in certain circumstances of overdose. And get on with it. And what we do is we go back to our ABC, our supportive care, And frequently, this majority of patients who present to us, we don't have an antidote available for them. So what we need to do is provide good supportive care. Other forms would be decontamination of the GIT, so activated charcoal, induced emesis, whole bowel irrigation. I'm going to speak very briefly about this. So activated charcoal, not much evidence, but we still use it. So if you come to hospital within an hour and you've taken, for example, paracetamol, we're going to give you this horrible black drink. It's probably going to make you vomit. Dose-wise, we usually give 50 grams for an adult and 1 gram per kilo for a child. There are contraindications to its use. So if you have a known electrolyte abnormality, if you have an unprotected airway and you're a very high risk of aspiration or vomiting, we wouldn't give it to you. Or if you have a known anatomical variant of your gastrointestinal tract. So previously, years ago, we spoke about stomach pumped, induced emesis. Like South Park's kind of a thing of the past. We don't really do that anymore, so I wouldn't advocate that. We don't do it. Whole barrel irrigation, rarely done. So it basically involves putting an NG tube down into the stomach, and we put 10 litres of polyethylene glycine via the NG tube. And this would be typically things like iron poisoning, which charcoal can't be used to treat, or persistent overdoses. So serious life-threatening overdoses or slow-release preparations. Very rarely done, very messy. So we've gone through our decontamination. So the next thing we look at will be elimination. So patients took, for example, a TCA overdose. We want to alkalize their urine with bicarbonate. Or if they took a sustained release overdose, we want to give them repeated activated doses of charcoal. For example, an aspirin overdose, severe, we may need to use hemodialysis, hemoperfusion, peritoneal dialysis, hemofiltration. These are all big things that we would use in the hospital setting.
From the paracetamol, Sinead, what type of dose indicates a serious overdose? Okay, sorry, thank you.
It's greater than 150 milligrams per kilogram, but two
We'll
slides
get
on,
there,
we'll get there.
Great, sorry.
So for Homer Simpsons, if you want to take off your glasses now, stop thinking about Duff beer, we'll just move on to specifics. This is really important to the advanced paramedics out there. Some of these are on your guidelines. So specific overdoses we're going to look at paracetamol. So it's all around us. It's really easy to buy. Buy it in the supermarket. You can buy it in the chemist. Some people don't realise there's paracetamol and Lemsip. People take accidental overdoses all the time because they don't realise what's in things. It can cause severe damage if you've taken, which is patients, the at-risk patients, and I'm going to speak about them in a minute. They're increased 5 milligrams per kilograms. So I'll go through the at-risk of work. Well, we actually don't know how it works, but we know how it's metabolized. So it's pathways in the liver, the sulfation, conjugation, and agglutination. Therefore, damage to your liver. Who's at risk for toxicity? So these are the alcoholics, the people who are on cytochrome P450 drugs, because they compete for metabolism. So if you go back a step, P450 drugs. So they compete for metabolism. People who are malnourished, the anorexics, your HIV infections, the cystic fibrosis, 75 milligrams per kilogram. So you need to be really careful with these people. And how do they present after taking an overdose? So typically in the first few hours, it's very vague, nausea, vomiting, abdominal discomfort, very much like gastrointestinal, gastroenteritis. Greater than 12 hours then, they tend to have tenderness in the right upper quadrant. They're vomiting profusely. They're really unwell. And if they're late in presenting, they tend to have jaundice. They may have convulsions, may well have coma, hematuria, renal failure, hepatic failure, DIC, septicemia, cerebral edema. So it's important to identify paracetamol overdoses early when we can treat them, because at this stage it's really too late. What kind of investigations do we do when they come to hospital? Well, the first thing that's going to be abnormal is their blood glucose. After that, their INR, their clotting factors start to go off. Their liver blood tests don't tend to rise till about 18 hours after they've taken the paracetamol. So it's important not to think, oh, the liver blood tests are normal, they can go home. They don't rise till about 18 hours after the overdose. The next thing we would check would be a paracetamol level, and we would do that at 4 hours after the overdose. So it's important to know the time when you've taken your overdose. So treatment options for paracetamol overdose would be, if they present within the first hour, we could give them some activated charcoal. Then we consider things like N-acetylcysteine, which is given intravenously or oral methionine, not used very in Ireland, more so in the protects the liver cells from the NAC toxicity. So what does it do? So it's drawn up, it's a weighted, the college over 15 minutes, and we had lots of patients with reactions. Now we run the first bag in over an hour, so if you're having a reaction, slow it down. Bronchospasm, hypotension, rash, so slow down your infusion. Methionine, typically used oral capsules, mostly used in the States, don't use very much in Ireland. How much do we give? We give 2.4 grams every 4 hours, total of 10 grams. Less effective than N-acetylcysteine in patients who are vomiting. So I'm going to go through the specifics of paracetamol overdose and management. So if a patient presents to you and they've ingested paracetamol, i.e. greater than 12 grams or 24 tablets, in the last hour, what we would do is we'll give them charcoal, 50 grams orally, and we will do paracetamol level at 4 hours. And then we'll have a look at that level at 4 hours, and we'll plot it on this paracetamol normal graph. Now this used to have 2 lines on the graph. This is the latest guidelines from college. So before we used to have a high risk level and a low risk level. Now we just have one treatment line. So on the x-axis we have time, and on the y-axis we have the plasma concentration of paracetamol. So you plot the time since your overdose, and you have a look at your plasma concentration of paracetamol from your blood test results. If you're above the treatment line, well then, or at or above the treatment line, you may well need to be treated. So it's important to know how your graph works and to have one in your department. 1 hour ago, but less than 4 hours, we don't give charcoal. We wait and do a level at 4 hours. If you've ingested your paracetamol greater than 4 hours but less than 15 hours, we'll do a level if we can get a level within 8 hours. If not, we'll just go ahead and give N-acetylcysteine. If you've taken a staggered overdose or you've ingested paracetamol more than 15 hours ago, well then we will go ahead and give you N-acetylcysteine. Or if you've ingested your paracetamol greater than 36 hours ago and you're already jaundiced, well then we go ahead and give your NAC. Now there's not much evidence for it because the damage is probably already done, but the guidelines would suggest you should give it. So how, tell me about this N-acetylcysteine. So basically, in Ireland we use 3 treatment regimes. The first is 150 milligrams per kilogram. It's in 200 mils of dextrose, and we give the first bag over an hour. The second bag is 50 milligrams per kilogram, and we would give that usually over 4 hours. And then the third bag would be 100 milligrams per kilogram. We usually give that over 8 hours. So special circumstances. So paracetamol overdose in children, very uncommon. They metabolize paracetamol very differently to adults. They're much less at risk of hepatotoxicity. The problem is we don't have any guidelines, so we treat them as per adult. Then we don't need to do any investigations, and we may well be able to send them home. If they've taken more than that, well then they're going to need N-acetylcysteine. And the question is, if a baby this age has taken an overdose of paracetamol, you want to know how have they got that much paracetamol. So you always think non-accidental injury. Other special circumstances would be pregnancy. So it's important to assess their risk for toxicity. You treat them as if they're not pregnant, so you give them N-acetylcysteine or oral methionine. And doesn't appear to have teratogenic effects, but we don't have much data available on that. The other special circumstance would be staggered overdose. So if you've taken 2 or more overdoses of paracetamol over a certain period of time, what you would do would be you plot your graph as per your first overdose, so the time of your first overdose. If more than 24 hours has passed in between the 2, well then it's very difficult and it's not very reliable to plot for staggered overdose, so you would treat as per the college guideline, which would say give N-acetylcysteine. So if you've ingested less than 75 milligrams, you have toxicity, but all staggered overdoses, like I just said, should be treated with N-acetylcysteine. If it's greater than 24 hours that pass by, you're unlikely to have hepatotoxicity if you're asymptomatic, if your paracetamol concentration is less than 5 milligrams per litre, if your INR is 1.3 or less, and if your ALT is less than 2 times the upper limit. So if it's greater than 24 hours and you don't have any of those features, it's unlikely that you've taken enough to cause serious damage to your liver. So treatment with N-acetylcysteine and methionine within 8 hours of an overdose is very effective in preventing liver and renal failure. Later than this, it's less effective, but it is worthwhile. Late presenters, they tend to be more likely to have severe poisoning, they have continued abdominal pain and vomiting, and the treatment graph is usually unreliable when it's greater than 15 hours. In Ireland, what services do we have available to us? Well, there's an app you can download. So the St. Vincent's Liver Transplant Centre have an app available, and they give us guidelines as to what investigations we should do, including magnesium, phosphate, liver blood test, pH, lactate. And they treat all their patients with N-acetylcysteine regardless of the quantity of overdose. They also give empiric antibiotics, IV tazocin. So these people who present late, they may well need a liver transplant, and we follow criteria for that. So the King's College guidelines would say if you have pH less than 7.3 or lactate greater than 3, or if you have all three of the following, creatinine greater than 300, an INR greater than 6.5, or encephalopathy grade 3 or 4, well then you meet the criteria for liver transplant. So the question would be, should we have patients diverted directly to St. Vincent's University Hospital who've taken this amount of paracetamol and meet the criteria? Next thing I'm going to talk about would be aspirin. So you can buy it over the counter, you can buy your 300, so your discipline is 300 milligrams of aspirin, you can buy it over the counter, you need a prescription for the 75. If you work in the States, they make it 81 milligrams. Pharmaceuticals, gallons of overdose with aspirin. You get tinnitus, ringing in your ears, you may have fever, vertigo, nausea and vomiting. The big thing is high ventilation. Again, you're going to pick it up early in your breathing. Late symptoms, you may well have convulsions, non-cardiogenic pulmonary edema and death. So aspirin, it's rapidly absorbed, so we can get a blood level within an hour. It's important to perform it a salicylic level if they're taking greater than 150 milligrams per kilogram. It's exactly the same as paracetamol. If they've taken more than 500 milligrams per kilogram, it can be very life-threatening. So what investigations do? We do a salicylic level, which peaks at 1 hour. We can check a pH, so either an arterial or a venous blood gas. And typically they tend to have a mixed metabolic acidosis and a respiratory acid alkalosis to compensate. We also do routine blood investigations, checking their liver. There's no antidote. So it's all about going back to your ABC. Whether you're an EMT, an advanced paramedic, a consultant in emergency medicine, it's all about supportive care. So in mild poisoning, so in children if they have less than 350 milligrams per litre, or adults less than 450, how are you going to treat them? Increase their oral intake, so increase their fluids. In moderate poisoning, how are you going to treat it? You may well need to give them IV fluids, and you may well need to give them some bicarbonate. So typically 1.26%, which causes alcohol, which differs from severe poisoning. 0.5. Paralyze them. You can give them so 8.4%. The CP, repeat that again and give them another 50 mils. That doesn't work. They go to edema. They're acidotic and they have CNS manifestations of overdose. So drug, very good for MIs. We like to prescribe it, but really dangerous in overdose. The other thing that these really scare me. So we don't really use tricyclic antidepressants for depression anymore. We have newer, nicer SSRIs, SNSRIs, but amitriptyline commonly used for back pain. Very good analgesic, but taken in overdose can have very effects. So what kind of clinical features do we see with tricyclics? So again, going back to looking for, we get dry eyes, we get dry skin, we get dry mouth, we get tachycardias, we can get hypertension, they can go into urinary retention, they can be confused, delirious, and then as it progresses, they can become bradycardic, they can become asystolic, they can get cardiac arrhythmias, they can have heart blocks. So they tend to produce a rapid onset of their clinical features. So they get sedation, coma, seizures, hypotension, tachycardia, and they get arrhythmias, which is the big scary thing. So initially they tend to present with a sinus tachycardia, progresses from there to prolongation of the PR interval, a widening of the QRS. The P wave may be superimposed on the T, where it looks like it's a ventricular arrhythmia, whereas in fact it's a sinus tachy with a P superimposed on the T. So very, very important. What are you going to do? Supportive care. Go back to your ABCs, open up their airway, have a look in, apply supplemental oxygen. What's the respiratory rate? What's the saturations? What's their heart rate? What's their blood pressure? Do they need IV access? They may well need intubation, and you need to have a look at their ECG. So if they have a prolonged QRS, it's very predictive, greater than 100 milliseconds of seizures. So you may well need to administer bicarbonate 8.4% as per your CPGs. And again, there is no antidote. So ABCs, if they present within an hour, we could give them activated charcoal. Usually they don't. These people don't want to be found. We can give repeated doses if it's sustained release. If they have seizures, if they're prolonged, we may well need to treat them with IV lorazepam. And how do we treat their arrhythmias? We treat their arrhythmias by correcting their acidosis and their hypoxia. So taking control of their airway, correcting their acidosis, so by administering sodium bicarbonate, so 50 to 100 mils of 8.4%. We correct their hypotension by elevating the foot of the bed. This is not rocket science, this is supportive care. We give them IV fluids. And then more definite care would be inotropic support, intensive care management, etc., etc. Unconscious patients, they tend to improve, usually within the first 12 hours. If they don't die, majority of TCA overdoses, 70% are dead before they get to hospital. So if they do get to hospital, it's important that we recognise early what they've taken, look for clues, and they may well have a prolonged period of intensive care. So I'm going to put it out there to the guys in Cork and to the guys in the OBI. Can anybody tell me what this is? So tweet your answers to Glenn and I'll come back to the slide. So next thing we think about. So you see a patient, they've headaches, they've nausea, they've dyspnea, they've collapse, they've lost of consciousness. What do you guys think this might be? Saturday night, people out on the town.
What we might assume it is might not necessarily be what
Exactly.
it is.
So you would assume that this potentially could be any number of overdoses, but it's a silent killer. So the most common cause of accidental toxicity is carbon monoxide. Do they get the nose? They may well have a pink or red tone to their skin. So important to look for it. It's a late sign. So go back to your circulation. They're going to be treated with, put them on a non-rebreather, and when they come to hospital we may need to organise hyperbaric oxygen therapy for them. I've just put up the CPG, page 45 for the advanced paramedics, just to remind them to have a look at it. I followed everything in there, there's nothing new, so just make sure you know your CPGs. So just to summarise again, so I think the important thing, regardless of your level of practice, take home would be A, B, C, so open the airway. Breathing, check your respiratory rate, your saturations, have a listen to the chest. From the circulation point of view, what's the heart rate? What's the blood pressure? Do we need to obtain IV access? Institute supportive care, make sure you're safe, so self-safety, scene safety, and then patient safety. Consult Aquaspace if you have access to it. Ring the poison centre. They're very nice, very useful. I call them on a daily basis, especially about Oompa Loompas in Cork. So going back, so do your risk assessment, institute your supportive care, look for investigations, decontamination, elimination, your antidotes available to you, call for help, so don't forget your ABCs, watch out for seizures, check the sugars, and if there's an antidote available, give it to them. So channel Dr. House, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. And I'd just like to say thanks very much to Glenn for asking me to come along, and to D4H Technologies and Robin for organising the evening, especially to Mitch for some of the slides, and PJ for sorting out the technology stuff, Anya and Andy, and Talkspace and lifeinthefastlane.com. Thanks very much.
Great stuff, that's great. And some great names up there. Life in the Fast Lane, fantastic, extra excellent guys at the moment, who has his own blog, very good anatomy and physiology. So if you can follow Andy, Life in the Fast Lane, or even Sinead as well, you're guaranteed to get some good information. Sinead, that was brilliant. There's a couple of things just coming in, and we're kind of ahead of what the centres are at the moment. So
sure.
The mushroom question has been answered. Just
can I say, so the EMS gathering is the 9th and 10th of June, and just say hello to Kieran Henry down there. He's organising it.
Yeah, Kieran's, you don't know where he is tonight. He could be anywhere.
He's in Cork.
He's in Cork, is he? Fantastic. So he should be tweeting in to let me know what the mushrooms are. So come on, Kieran, get with it. So Padraig Barrett, who's based in Cork, has asked, is there a maximum amount of radiation a patient can be subject to in a year?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
You'd have to ask a radiation oncologist.
Peter.
I can tell you that one abdominal x-ray is the equivalent to 35 chest x-rays. So what we do in emergency departments, we call it VOMIT, Victim of Modern Imaging Technology.
Mm-hmm.
So we try and see how many x-rays they've had, but I don't know the actual dose of radiation.
Okay. Peter Conroy, who's tweeting from the OBI tonight, says amyl nitrate poisoning. Ask about that, as I got a case in Dublin recently, and it was great to see and learn how to treat. Guy had taken poppers, and when we got there, he was the greyest person I had ever seen, like a dead grey, but worse.
So again, go back to your ABCs, supportive care, ring the poison center, consult your tox base, so you have specific management for it.
Okay. No immediate treatment that you can recommend. ABC is straight.
ABC, nothing that you're going to use pre-hospital.
As well. You'd love to bring to our guys, we could have done a bit better on that.
I think sometimes the history is not always very clear to us. So if there's any intubator that I subsequently got that she
using the baby's bottles to learn exactly how they're measuring out their day. Much appreciated.
To overdose on them? Well, it's usually Asians, because in China they have straw patty mushrooms which look exactly the same as Amanita phalloides. How do they present hospital? Typically for the first 9-10 hours they're asymptomatic. Then the second phase would be the GI phase, so they get gastroenteritis, diarrhea and vomiting, and you could easily say, oh, you have a bit of gastro, you can go home. Then the asymptomatic phase again, and about 24, 48, 72 hours after that they go into renal. They go into fulminant liver, and the only treatment for them is a liver transplant. We don't have high doses of benzyl penicillin, 6.5 grams, and we can give them IV silibinin, which is thought to be hepatoprotective. So we've had a couple of cases in Ireland of overdose on this. There's been a few case reports published. I got my paper published in the Journal of Wilderness Medicine in Australia. We were a bit desperate, but we got it published. Normally eat in Vietnam. So important to be very careful with the mushrooms.
Okay, excellent. I speak a lot about smack.
I have a job in Sydney Hems,
so the guys out there over there.
So Nat has a job in Sydney. She'll be coming to Smack.
Yeah. If you can go back to CPC nights and give us a bit and bring back when we're Delta 7. Irish hashtag Irish EMS. If you do Irish and with the HEMS, with the National Ambulance Service, we're giving their feedback, and others from outside were giving their feedback to how we're doing our business. So an interesting thing to look at and keep an eye on it going forward. Sinead, thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's brilliant having you. Thanks a lot. So now we've come to the yeah. Any questions, by the way? No? Any questions from here?
I was going to ask. Sorry. How soon after paracetamol overdose are you going to see glucose changes?
So usually glucose is the first thing to rise. So in the first couple of hours, 4 to 6 hours, you see
and
your
you're
glucose. Hypo or hypo-her. First thing that's going to change. The first thing you're going to be looking out for.
That was actually my question. It's not just relevant to venous blood, it'll show up on a standard glucometer pre-hospital.
Yeah. See, we tend to venous gas out of it because we'll get their electrolytes, we'll get their pH, we'll get their lactate, we'll get from arterial blood gases in hospital. Keep an eye on it. Especially if you're treating with NAC, because it's in dextrose.
And will that respond to glucagon?
We wouldn't usually treat low sugar with glucagon. We would usually give them IV dextrose. So if it's low sugar, we give 50 ml. 10% dextrose would be the in-hospital guideline. I'm not sure about the pre-hospital guideline.
You're around the same as well.
D10 to 50.
Yeah. But I mean, from a pre-hospital dex available, would glucagon, because that would be their obviously first drug of choice then, would it have an effect?
Well, yeah, you follow your normal standard guidelines.
Yeah.
We wouldn't routinely do that in hospital.
Yeah.
Glucose or glucagon?
Well, a paramedic crew isn't going to have access to IV glucose.
Here in Ireland.
What about like Glucosade, Glucogel?
Yeah, but they're obviously going to go unresponsive patient. Glucose is low, blood sugars are low. It affect the airway by giving some PO, so they're going to go with IM.
I think that's fair enough. So what I would say would be follow your CPGs. Do what you normally do, because you don't actually know until you get your paracetamol level that they've actually taken a paracetamol overdose. So follow your practice, your normal practice for hypoglycemia. Absolutely.
Brilliant, great question. Thanks. So listen. We've come to the end of another night of OBI CPC nights. At this stage, I hate this time of year because I have to, in November, wish you all a very, very happy Christmas. Thank you for supporting us throughout the year. We changed things slightly tonight with the setup, i.e. the interview type setup, the screen, and thanks to Robin for having us here as well. If you like it, let us know. If you don't, let us know also. Our email is cpcnights@gmail.com. We're back at the end of January. First talker has been lining themselves up already as sepsis. So I have a big input in sepsis, and you never know where you might find us next time broadcasting for. So thanks to Grania Ryan, who sends all the emails, looks after all the paperwork and everything else afterwards to search. So thanks, Grania. Thanks to all the facilitators around the country, 17 centres in total tonight, who joined us. So thank you for getting up off your backside and actually organising it for your colleagues. So I think in your centre, there's a round of applause around now. Thanks to the guys for joining us here. I know people, in the last week through the OBI, we've had John Lynch, we've had Brian Perdue, we've had Danny. Myself have been out in the OBI every day for the past 5 days from Friday trying to get the OBI online, and unfortunately it didn't happen to us couldn't work out for us at this stage, but we are working to take it back to the OBI as such. But I want to thank those guys for giving up their time every day, 3 or 4 hours. So again, all for the benefit of patients, for you guys, so you can pick up on phone med. So with that, I'd say thanks, good night, happy Christmas, and see you on the new year. Thanks, guys.